Hello and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so grateful you're here. Let's kick things off with today's thrilling story. Kevin Sawyer's calloused hands gripped a cold beer as he surveyed his backyard. Friends and family milled about, paper plates laden with barbecue and potato salad. It was his 45th birthday, but something felt off. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. Kevin's steely blue eyes narrowed as he caught sight of his wife Miranda. She was laughing too loudly at something their neighbor, Noelle Morrison, had said. Her hand lingered on Noelle's arm a beat too long. Kevin's jaw tightened. He'd known Miranda for 20 years, been married to her for 17. He knew her tells. The way her eyes darted away when she lied. The slight tremor in her voice when she was hiding something. And right now, every instinct honed by years in construction management was screaming that something was very wrong. He drained his beer and headed for the cooler, nodding at acquaintances as he passed. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Miranda lean in close to whisper something to Noelle. Noelle's hand brushed the small of her back. Kevin's fingers tightened around the neck of his fresh beer bottle. He wanted to march over there, to demand answers. But no, not here, not now. He'd confront her later, when the guests were gone. When their 16-year-old son, Zach, wasn't around to witness whatever ugliness might unfold. "Hey, Kevin," his coworker, Tom, called out. "Great party, man. How's it feel to be halfway to 90? Kevin forced a smile. "Like I need another beer. You want one?" As the party wound down, Kevin found himself in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Miranda breezed in, her cheeks flushed from wine and laughter. "Need any help, birthday boy?" she asked, her tone light. Kevin straightened, fixing her with a hard stare. "What's going on with you and Noelle?" Miranda's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Miranda. I saw you two out there, whispering, touching. What's going on?" Miranda's eyes flashed with defiance. The mask of the dutiful wife slipped away, revealing something cold and unfamiliar beneath. "He's been more of a husband to me than you ever were in our 17 years of marriage," she spat. The words hit Kevin like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a new voice joined the fray. "Dad, don't bother asking questions. He's been spending more nights here than you." Kevin turned to see Zach standing in the doorway, his young face twisted with a mixture of anger and pain. The boy's words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and betrayal. "Zach," Miranda started, her voice suddenly soft. "Honey, it's not what you think." "Save it, Mom," Zach cut her off. "I'm not stupid. I've seen the texts. I've heard the phone calls. How could you do this to Dad?" In that moment, Kevin's world imploded. The carefully constructed facade of his life, the happy marriage, the stable home, crumbled around him. Rage boiled up inside him, threatening to overflow. With a voice that sounded calmer than he felt, Kevin addressed the remaining guests. "Party's over, folks. Thanks for coming, but it's time to go." People began to file out, murmuring confused goodbyes. But Noelle, emboldened by alcohol and arrogance, refused to leave. "Come on, Kev," Noelle slurred, swaying slightly. "Don't be like that. We're all friends here, right?" Kevin said nothing. He turned and walked to the garage, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he returned, he was holding a baseball bat. Noelle's eyes widened. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to get away. Kevin watched, bat in hand, as Noelle ran down the driveway and disappeared into the night. The remaining guests left in stunned silence, shooting worried glances over their shoulders as they hurried to their cars. In the aftermath, Kevin sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Miranda had stormed off to their bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Zach had retreated to his room as well, leaving Kevin alone with his thoughts. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he pored over financial records, bank statements, and credit card bills. By the time the sun rose, casting its pale light through the kitchen windows, Kevin had a clear picture of what had been happening under his nose. Miranda stumbled into the kitchen around 9 a.m., her hair disheveled and her eyes bloodshot. She made a beeline for the coffee pot, pointedly ignoring Kevin. "What's all this?" she asked finally, gesturing at the papers spread across the table. Kevin's voice was ice when he responded. Divorce papers. I've already called my lawyer. Miranda's hangover seemed to evaporate instantly. She sneered at him, her pretty features twisting into something ugly. You think it'll be that easy? I'll take you for everything you're worth. I wouldn't count on that, Kevin replied, sliding over a stack of financial records. I've been tracking your errands and Noel's sudden influx of cash. Embezzlement's a serious crime, Miranda. The color drained from Miranda's face. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes. But then her mask of defiance slipped back into place. You can't prove anything. Kevin's smile was wolfish. Watch me. Miranda opened her mouth to retort, but was cut off by the sound of the front door slamming open. Noel burst into the kitchen, his face red with anger. You threatening Miranda, Kevin? Big mistake, Noel growled. Kevin stood his ground, squaring his shoulders. Despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours, he felt oddly calm. The mistake was yours, Noel. Both of you. Noel lunged forward, throwing a wild punch. But Kevin, hardened by years of physical labor on construction sites, easily deflected the blow. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Noel's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing the other man to his knees. Listen carefully, Kevin said, his voice low and deadly calm. I've got evidence of your little scheme. You've got one chance to come clean, or I'm taking it all to the police. From the doorway, Miranda watched the scene unfold. The gravity of their situation was finally sinking in. She had gambled everything on this affair, on the promise of excitement and wealth that Noel had dangled in front of her. Now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. Kevin released Noel, who scrambled to his feet, rubbing his sore arm. The two men stared at each other, the air thick with tension. You've got 24 hours, Kevin said. After that, I start making phone calls. To the police, to your boss, to everyone. Noel glanced at Miranda, panic evident in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and fled from the house. In the silence that followed, Kevin turned to his wife, the woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with. Now, looking at her, he felt nothing but contempt. I want you out of this house by tomorrow, he said. You can stay with your sister, or with Loverboy for all I care. But you're not staying here. What about Zach? Miranda asked, her voice small. Zach stays with me, Kevin replied. Unless you want to explain to a judge why an embezzler and adulterer should have custody. Miranda's shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she turned and headed upstairs to pack her things. Kevin sat back down at the kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal. He felt drained, but also strangely liberated. The truth was out now. He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Zach enter the kitchen. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. Without a word, Kevin stood and pulled his son into a tight embrace. As they stood there in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, Kevin felt a glimmer of hope. His marriage was over, his trust shattered, but he still had his son. He still had his integrity, and he had the truth. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, just like he always had. Kevin's mind raced as he tried to process the events of the past 24 hours. He needed a plan, a way to protect himself and Zach from the fallout of Miranda and Noel's betrayal. Zach, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I need you to tell me everything you know. When did this start? What have you seen or heard? Zach slumped into a kitchen chair, a gesture so like Kevin's own that it made his heart ache. It's been going on for months, Dad. At least 6, maybe more. I started noticing little things at first. Mom being on her phone all the time, laughing at texts. Then I overheard a phone call one night when you were working late. Kevin nodded, encouraging his son to continue. She was talking about money, about how they needed to be careful. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw Noel leaving the house early one morning when you were out of town for that big project in Roanoke. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. You did good, son. I know it must have been hard, keeping this to yourself. Zach looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I wanted to tell you, Dad. I really did. But Mom, she said it would destroy you, destroy our family. She said it was just a phase, that it would be over soon. Kevin placed a hand on Zach's shoulder, squeezing gently. This isn't your fault, Zach. None of it. Your mother and Noelle made their choices. We're going to get through this together, okay? Zach nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. What happens now? Kevin sighed, looking at the pile of documents on the table. Now, we protect ourselves. I'm going to call my lawyer again, get the ball rolling on the divorce. We might need to talk to the police about the embezzlement. But first, I need you to do something for me. Anything, Dad. I need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, times, conversations you overheard. Anything that might be important. Can you do that for me? Zach nodded, a determined look crossing his face. I can do that. I want to help. Kevin managed a small smile. That's my boy. Now, why don't you go upstairs and get started on that? I need to make a few phone calls. As Zach headed upstairs, Kevin pulled out his cell phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart, waiting as it rang. Stanley? It's Kevin. We need to talk. There's been a situation, and it might affect the company. Can you meet me at the office in an hour? After hanging up, Kevin took a deep breath. He looked around the kitchen, at the remnants of his birthday party still scattered about. It felt like a lifetime ago. Upstairs, he could hear Miranda moving around, presumably packing her things. Part of him wanted to confront her again, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain he was feeling. But he knew it would be pointless. She had made her choice. Instead, he focused on what needed to be done. He gathered the financial records he'd been reviewing, placing them carefully in his briefcase. Then, he headed upstairs to change. As he passed the guest room, he saw Miranda stuffing clothes into a suitcase. She looked up as he paused in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy. Kevin, please, she started, her voice trembling. Can't we talk about this? 17 years of marriage has to count for something. Kevin felt a surge of anger, but he pushed it down. When he spoke, his voice was cold and controlled. You're right, Miranda. 17 years does count for something. It counts for alimony, and it counts for how the judge will view your infidelity and embezzlement. Beyond that, it means nothing. Miranda flinched as if he'd struck her. You don't mean that. We can work this out. I made a mistake. I know that. But I love you, Kevin. I love our family. Kevin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Love? Is that what you call fucking our neighbor and stealing from my company? Save your lies, Miranda. I'm not interested. He turned to leave, but Miranda's voice stopped him. What about Zach? Are you going to turn his mother into a criminal? Is that what's best for him? Kevin felt his control slipping. He spun around, his eyes blazing. Don't you dare use Zach as a shield. You didn't think about what was best for him when you were screwing Noelle in our bed. You didn't think about him when you were embezzling money that could have sent him to college. You don't get to play the concerned mother now. Miranda recoiled, tears streaming down her face. But Kevin felt no sympathy. He'd cried his own tears last night, alone in the dark. Now, he was done crying. Now, he was angry. I'm going to the office, he said, his voice cold. I expect you to be gone when I get back. If you need more time, you can come back tomorrow when I'm at work. But as of now, you no longer live here. Without waiting for a response, Kevin turned and walked away. He stopped by Zach's room, knocking softly on the door. Come in, Zach called. Kevin opened the door to find his son sitting at his desk, scribbling furiously in a notebook. I'm heading to the office for a bit. Will you be okay here alone? Zach nodded, looking up from his writing. Yeah, Dad. I'll be fine. Are you okay? Kevin managed a small smile. I will be, son. We both will be. It's going to be tough for a while, but we'll get through it. Zach stood up and hugged his father tightly. Kevin returned the embrace, feeling a lump form in his throat. When they pulled apart, both their eyes were moist. I'll be back soon, Kevin said, ruffling Zach's hair. Call me if you need anything, okay? As Kevin drove to the office, his mind was already working on the next steps. He'd need to secure the company's finances, make sure Miranda couldn't access any more funds. He'd need to start documenting everything for the divorce proceedings. and he'd need to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild his life from the ashes of betrayal. It wouldn't be easy, but Kevin Sawyer had never shied away from hard work. He'd built his career with his own two hands, climbing the ranks from apprentice to foreman to project manager. He'd faced this challenge the same way he faced every other, head-on, with determination and grit. As he pulled into the parking lot of his office building, Kevin took a deep breath. The man who walked out of this car would not be the same one who had celebrated his birthday yesterday. That man was gone, along with the life he thought he had. But in his place stood someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't be fooled again. Someone who would fight for what was his, and for the future he and Zach deserved. Kevin grabbed his briefcase, squared his shoulders, and walked into the building. The battle was just beginning. Kevin Sawyer stepped onto the construction site, the familiar smell of sawdust and concrete filling his nostrils. It was a welcome distraction from the chaos of his personal life. Here, he was in control. Here, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Or so he thought. "Sawyer," a voice called out. Kevin turned to see Stanley Humphrey, the company owner, striding towards him. The older man's face was etched with worry lines. "We've got a problem," Stanley said without preamble. "Bullock Construction is suing us. They're claiming we stole their proprietary designs for the Riverside project." Kevin felt his stomach drop. The Riverside project was their biggest contract to date. If they lost it, the company would be in serious trouble. And as project manager, the blame would fall squarely on his shoulders. "That's impossible," Kevin said, his mind racing. "We developed those designs in-house. I oversaw the entire process myself." Stanley nodded grimly. "I know that, and you know that. But Bullock's got some pretty convincing evidence. If we can't disprove their claims, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And that's not even considering the damage to our reputation." Kevin's jaw clenched. He'd be damned if he'd let this company, his company, go down because of some baseless accusation. "Give me everything we've got on Bullock in this lawsuit. I'll figure this out." As Stanley walked away, Kevin's phone buzzed. A text from Miranda. "We need to talk about the divorce, and the house, and Zach." Kevin ignored the message without responding. He had bigger problems to deal with right now. Over the next few days, Kevin threw himself into researching Bullock Construction and their CEO, Francisco Bullock. He pored over financial reports, court records, and industry gossip. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Francisco Bullock was a man with a history of frivolous lawsuits, to be exact. Kevin found case after case where Bullock had sued smaller companies, usually settling out of court for substantial sums. It was a pattern, a business strategy disguised as legal action. As Kevin dug deeper, he uncovered something even more interesting. Bullock Construction was in financial trouble. Their last few projects had gone over budget, and they were bleeding money. This lawsuit wasn't just about stealing designs. It was a desperate attempt to stay afloat. Kevin smiled grimly as he compiled his findings. Bullock had picked the wrong company to mess with this time. Meanwhile, across town, Miranda and Noel were having a very different conversation. "We need to do something," Miranda hissed, pacing back and forth in Noel's small apartment. "Kevin's going to take everything in the divorce. We need to weaken his position." Noel lounged on the couch, looking unconcerned. "Relax, babe. We've got the embezzlement stuff on our side. He can't prove anything without implicating himself." Miranda shot him a withering look. "You don't know Kevin like I do. He's not going to back down. We need to hit him where it hurts." At work, a slow smile spread across Noel's face. "I might have an idea about that." The next day, Miranda walked into Sawyer Construction's main office, her head held high. She ignored the whispers and stares from the employees who knew her as Kevin's ex-wife. She reminded herself. "I need to speak with Stanley Humphrey," she told the receptionist. "It's urgent." 10 minutes later, she was seated across from Stanley, her face a mask of concern. "I'm worried about Kevin," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He's been unstable lately, drinking too much, flying into rages." Stanley's brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound like Kevin." Miranda leaned forward, her eyes wide. "I know. That's why I'm so concerned. I think the stress of the job might be getting to him." I'm afraid he might do something drastic. As Miranda spun her tale, she could see doubt creeping into Stanley's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Across town, Noel was putting his own plan into action. He'd managed to get his hands on a set of keys to the construction site office. Now, under cover of darkness, he slipped inside. His target was Kevin's computer. If he could plant some incriminating documents, maybe some correspondence with Bullock Construction, it would be enough to cast doubt on Kevin's innocence in the lawsuit. Noel booted up the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But as he tried to access Kevin's files, he hit a wall. Extra security measures, ones he hadn't anticipated. After several failed attempts, he was forced to retreat, empty-handed and frustrated. What Noel didn't know was that Kevin had been one step ahead. Anticipating some kind of sabotage, he'd beefed up the security on all his work devices. As Noel left the office, a silent alert pinged on Kevin's phone, along with a crystal-clear image from the hidden camera he'd installed. Kevin allowed himself a small smile. Let them play their games. He was gathering all the evidence he needed. The next week, Kevin stood before the company's legal team, his research spread out before him. "Gentlemen," he began, "I think you'll find this interesting." Over the next hour, Kevin laid out everything he'd uncovered about Francisco Bullock and his company. The history of frivolous lawsuits, the financial troubles, the desperate need for a big payout. "But here's the kicker," Kevin said, pulling out a final document. "I've uncovered evidence of some highly unethical practices at Bullock Construction. Corners cut on safety measures, substandard materials used to save costs. If this information were to come to light, it would destroy their reputation in the industry." The lead lawyer leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "This is excellent work, Kevin. With this, we can not only defend against their lawsuit, but potentially countersue for defamation." As Kevin left the meeting, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd done it. He'd saved the company, and his job along with it. But his relief was short-lived. As he walked to his car, he saw a familiar figure lurking near the entrance. Noel. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm. He wouldn't give Noel the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "What are you doing here?" Kevin asked, his voice cold. Noel smirked, but Kevin could see the nervousness in his eyes. "Just passing by. Thought I'd say hello to an old friend." "We're not friends," Kevin said flatly. "And if I catch you anywhere near this site again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Noel's smirk faltered. "You can't prove anything, Sawyer. You've got nothing on us." Kevin leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "I've got more than you know. Now get out of here before I decide to share some of that information with the police." As Noel scurried away, Kevin allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He was winning this battle on all fronts. The next day, the news broke. Francisco Bullock had been arrested on charges of fraud and safety violations. Sawyer Construction's countersuit had brought all of Bullock's misdeeds to light. In the aftermath, Kevin found himself in Stanley's office once again. But this time, the older man was smiling. "You've done an incredible job, Kevin," Stanley said. "You saved this company from a potentially ruinous lawsuit, and in the process, you've shown leadership skills I didn't know you had." Kevin nodded, accepting the praise. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." Stanley leaned forward, his expression serious. "I think it's time we discussed your future with this company. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? Say, as vice president of operations?" Kevin felt a surge of pride. This was what he'd been working towards for years. "I'd be honored, sir." As Kevin left Stanley's office, his new title ringing in his ears, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He'd faced challenges on all fronts, personal and professional, and he'd come out on top. But as he drove home, his thoughts turned to Miranda and Noel. They'd been quiet lately, too quiet. Kevin knew them well enough to know they wouldn't give up easily. They'd be planning something desperate. Well, let them try, Kevin thought. He was ready for whatever they might throw at him next. As he pulled into his driveway, Kevin saw Zach sitting on the front porch, waiting for him. The sight of his son brought a genuine smile to his face. No matter what happened with Miranda and Noel, no matter what challenges he faced at work, he had Zach. And that was what really mattered. Kevin got out of the car, ready to share his good news with his son. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Across town, in Noel's dingy apartment, Miranda paced back and forth, her face a mask of fury. "Did you see the news?" she spat. "That bastard not only beat the lawsuit, but he got Francisco arrested. And now he's been promoted." Noel lounged on the couch, his usual smirk replaced by a scowl. "Calm down, babe. We'll figure something out." Miranda whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "Calm down? Calm down? We're losing everything, Noel. The money, the house, my son. And you want me to calm down?" Noel stood up, grabbing Miranda's arms. "Listen to me. We're not done yet. We've still got one more card to play." Miranda looked at him, a mix of desperation and hope in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Noel's grin was ugly. "We're going to make Kevin look like the bad guy. And I've got just the plan to do it." As Noel outlined his scheme, Miranda felt a chill run down her spine. It was risky, potentially dangerous. But what choice did they have? Kevin had outmaneuvered them at every turn. This was their last chance to turn the tables. "Okay," Miranda said finally. "Let's do it." As the sun set over the city, three people in different locations prepared for the battles to come. Kevin, confident but wary, ready to protect what was his. Miranda and Noel, desperate and dangerous, willing to risk everything on one final gambit. The stage was set for a showdown that would change all their lives forever. Noel Morrison paced the dingy living room of his apartment, his face a mask of desperation. The cheap laminate flooring creaked under his feet with each pass. Miranda sat on the threadbare couch, her once perfect manicure now chipped and ragged. They'd been plotting for hours, fueled by cheap whiskey and cheaper promises. "It's gotta be perfect," Noel muttered. "One slip up and we're done." Miranda nodded, her eyes hard. "Kevin's smart. He'll be expecting something." Noel's lips curled into a sneer. "Yeah, well, he won't be expecting this. You remember the plan?" "Of course I remember," Miranda snapped. "I'm not an idiot." Noel stopped pacing and fixed her with a hard stare. "Could have fooled me. If you hadn't been so careless with the embezzlement." "Oh, don't you dare pin this all on me," Miranda hissed, standing up. "You were more than happy to take the money when it was rolling in." Noel waved her off. "Water under the bridge. We need to focus on what's next." The plan was simple, in theory. Frame Kevin for assault. Noel would rough himself up, Miranda would corroborate the story, and Kevin would find himself on the wrong side of the law. With a criminal record, his cushy new job would vanish, along with any leverage in the divorce proceedings. "You sure you can sell this?" Noel asked, eyeing Miranda skeptically. Miranda's laugh was bitter. "Please. I've been acting the part of the loving wife for years. This'll be a cakewalk." What they didn't know was that Kevin was already 10 steps ahead. Kevin Sawyer sat in his home office, surrounded by screens. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout the house weeks ago, a precaution born of years dealing with shady contractors and even shadier lawyers. Now, those cameras were his ace in the hole. He watched as Noel stumbled into view, Miranda close behind. They were arguing, their voices muffled but their body language clear. Kevin leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he saw Noel begin to hit himself, creating bruises that would later be blamed on Kevin. "Amateurs," Kevin muttered, a grim smile playing on his lips. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Jack? It's Kevin. I think it's time to put our plan into action." The next day, Kevin was unsurprised to find 2 police officers at his door. What did surprise him was the sight of Zach, standing behind them, his young face a mixture of confusion and fear. "Mr. Sawyer," one of the officers said, his voice professionally neutral. "We need to ask you some questions about an alleged assault." Kevin nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Of course, officers. I've been expecting you." As they settled in the living room, Kevin caught Zach's eye. "It's okay, son," he said softly. "This will all be over soon." The questioning was brief but intense. The officers relayed Noel's story of a violent confrontation, corroborated by Miranda's tearful testimony. Kevin listened in silence, his face impassive. "Mr. Sawyer," the lead officer said, "Mr. Morrison claims you attacked him last night, unprovoked." He has the injuries to back up his story, and your wife has corroborated his account. Do you have anything to say about these allegations? Kevin leaned forward, his voice calm. Officers, I appreciate you doing your job, but I think there's something you need to see. He led them to his office, Zach trailing behind. With a few keystrokes, the screens came to life, showing crystal-clear footage of Noelle and Miranda's clumsy attempt at deception. The officers watched in stunned silence. When the video ended, the lead officer turned to Kevin. Mr. Sawyer, I think we owe you an apology. Kevin waved it off. No need. You were doing your job. But I would like to press charges against Mr. Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife for filing a false report. As the officers left, promising to return with warrants, Zach looked at his father with a mixture of awe and respect. Dad, how did you know? Kevin put a hand on his son's shoulder. I've learned to always be prepared, Zach, especially when dealing with people like your mother and Noelle. But the cameras, isn't that like invasion of privacy or something? Kevin sighed. It's my house, son, and given what they were planning, I'd say it was justified. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Across town, Miranda and Noelle were celebrating their perceived victory with cheap champagne when the doorbell rang. Their smiles faded as they opened the door to find not only the police but Kevin himself, flanked by his lawyer. What's going on? Miranda demanded, her voice shrill. Kevin's smile was cold. Justice, Miranda. Pure and simple. As the officers read Miranda and Noelle their rights, Kevin's lawyer stepped forward, producing a thick folder. Mr. Sawyer has some things he'd like to discuss with you both. Inside, Kevin laid out the evidence methodically. The camera footage, bank statements showing the embezzled funds, emails detailing their plots and schemes. With each new piece of damning information, Miranda and Noelle seemed to shrink, their bravado evaporating. You've got nothing, Noelle sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. Kevin reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. This contains everything, he said calmly. Every transaction, every lie, every scheme. You have two choices. Confess and face the consequences, or I take this to the police. Miranda, who had been silent until now, suddenly broke down. Kevin, please, she sobbed. We can work this out. For Zach's sake. Kevin's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare use our son as a shield, Miranda. You lost that right when you chose to betray us both. But he needs his mother. Miranda wailed. He needs stability and honesty. Kevin shot back. Two things you seem incapable of providing. Noelle, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on Miranda. It was all her idea, he blurted. She came to me, said she was unhappy. I never meant for it to go this far. Miranda's sobs turned to shrieks of rage. You bastard. After everything we've been through, you're going to throw me under the bus? Enough. Kevin's voice cut through the chaos. You're both going down for this. The only question is how hard you want to fall. As Miranda and Noelle turned on each other, Kevin stood and nodded to the officers. I think we're done here, he said quietly. They're all yours. In the weeks that followed, the truth came to light in a very public way. Noelle was arrested for embezzlement, his reputation in the community shattered beyond repair. Miranda, facing the consequences of her actions, lost any chance at custody of Zach and forfeited all claims to Kevin's assets. Kevin found himself in a meeting with Stanley Humphrey, the company owner. Stanley leaned back in his chair, a pleased expression on his face. Kevin, I've got to hand it to you, Stanley said. The way you handled the Bullock lawsuit was impressive enough, but the grace you've shown under personal pressure, that's the kind of strength we need in our top leadership. Kevin raised an eyebrow. What are you saying, Stanley? I'm saying, how would you like to be our new chief operations officer? Corner office, substantial pay raise, the works. Kevin felt a surge of pride, but kept his expression neutral. I'd be honored, Stanley. Thank you for the opportunity. As he left Stanley's office, Kevin allowed himself a small smile. He'd weathered the storm, both personal and professional, and come out stronger for it. But for all his professional success, it was his personal life that gave Kevin the most satisfaction. He and Zach grew closer than ever, bonding over shared meals and long talks on the porch of their home. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Zach turned to his father. Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner about Mom and Noel. Kevin put a hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing gently. You did the right thing in the end, Zach. That's what matters. Zach was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you think Mom will ever change? Kevin sighed, choosing his words carefully. I don't know, son. People can change, but they have to want to. Your mother. She's got a lot to work through. Are you angry with her? Kevin thought about it. I was at first. Now, I'm just disappointed. But that's not something you need to worry about. Your job is to focus on school, on your friends, on growing up to be the best man you can be. Zach nodded, then surprised Kevin by leaning in for a hug. Thanks, Dad, for everything. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kevin allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had faced betrayal with strength, overcome challenges with intelligence, and emerged not just victorious, but respected and whole. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be tough conversations with Zach, therapy sessions to work through the trauma of the past months. The divorce proceedings would drag on, a constant reminder of what had been lost. But as Kevin sat there with his son, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had survived the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, just as he always had. The next morning, Kevin woke early, his mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. As he made coffee, Zach stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and yawning. Morning, champ, Kevin said, sliding a plate of toast across the counter. Sleep okay? Zach shrugged. I guess. Had some weird dreams. Kevin nodded sympathetically. Want to talk about it? For a moment, it looked like Zach might refuse. Then, haltingly, he began to speak. I dreamed about Mom. She was crying, saying she was sorry. But then she turned into this monster. And Noel was there, laughing. Kevin set down his coffee cup, giving Zach his full attention. That sounds pretty intense. How did it make you feel? Scared. Angry. I don't know. Zach pushed his toast around the plate. Dad, do you think I'll ever be able to trust Mom again? Kevin took a deep breath. This was the kind of conversation he'd been preparing for, but it still wasn't easy. That's up to you, Zach. Trust is earned, not given. If your mom wants to rebuild that trust, she'll have to work at it. But you're not obligated to give her that chance if you're not ready. Zach nodded slowly. I think I need some time. Is that okay? Of course it is, Kevin said firmly. You take all the time you need. And remember, I'm always here if you want to talk. As Zach headed off to school, Kevin felt a mixture of pride and sadness. His son was growing up faster than he'd ever imagined, forced to confront adult realities far too soon. But he was handling it with a maturity that amazed Kevin. Later that day, Kevin sat in his new corner office, reviewing quarterly reports. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Come in, he called. To his surprise, it was Miranda who entered. She looked different, thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes. The confident, polished woman he'd married was nowhere to be seen. Kevin, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk to you. Kevin leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. I thought my lawyer made it clear. Any communication needs to go through him. Miranda nodded, wringing her hands. I know. But this isn't about the divorce or anything legal. It's about Zach. Despite himself, Kevin felt a flicker of concern. What about Zach? I want to see him, Miranda said quickly, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. I know I don't have any right to ask, but he's my son, Kevin. I miss him. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman before him. Finally, he spoke. You're right. You don't have any right to ask. But Zach is old enough to make his own decisions. If he wants to see you, I won't stand in the way. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Kevin. I know I don't deserve. You're right. Kevin cut her off, his voice hard. You don't. But this isn't about you, or me. It's about what's best for Zach. I'll talk to him, see how he feels. That's the best I can offer. Miranda nodded, looking both grateful and ashamed. As she turned to leave, Kevin called out, "Miranda?" She paused at the door, looking back. "Get help," Kevin said simply. "For Zach's sake, if not your own." After she left, Kevin sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He'd meant what he said. This was Zach's decision to make. But he couldn't help feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at Miranda's audacity, concern for Zach's well-being, and, buried deep beneath it all, a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. Not for reconciliation. That ship had long since sailed. But for healing. For all of them. As the day drew to a close, Kevin packed up his things and headed home. The house was quiet when he arrived, Zach not yet back from his after-school activities. Kevin used the time to start dinner, falling into the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and seasoning meat. When Zach arrived, they sat down to eat, sharing stories about their day. Kevin waited until they were nearly finished before broaching the subject of Miranda's visit. "Your mom came to see me today," he said carefully, watching Zach's reaction. Zach's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Oh," he said quietly. What did she want?" Kevin took a deep breath. "She wants to see you. But I told her it's your decision. You don't have to if you're not ready." Zach was quiet for a long moment, pushing food around his plate. Finally, he looked up. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Kevin said, relief evident in his voice. "Take all the time you need. There's no rush." Later that night, as Kevin lay in bed, he reflected on the day's events. The challenges weren't over, far from it. But for the first time in months, he felt like they were moving forward instead of just treading water. Whatever came next, he and Zach would face it together. And that, Kevin realized, was all that really mattered.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate you joining us, and we can't wait to dive into another cheating wife story. So, without further ado, let's begin. Marcus Steele's pager went off like a firecracker, shattering the relative calm of the hospital corridor. He glanced at the tiny screen, his eyes widening as he read the message. "Trauma incoming. All hands on deck." Without hesitation, he sprinted down the hallway, his white coat billowing behind him like a cape. The pristine floors squeaked under his polished shoes as he burst through the double doors into the operating room. "What VE we got?" he barked, extending his arms as a nurse helped him into a surgical gown. 8-year-old female. Multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding. "Car crash," the head nurse, Sarah, replied crisply. Her eyes, visible above her surgical mask, were steady and focused. Marcus nodded, his mind already racing through possible scenarios and procedures. As he pulled on his latex gloves with practiced ease, a fleeting thought of Vanessa crossed his mind. She'd been distant lately, canceling their dinner plans more often than not. He pushed the thought aside. There would be time for that later. "Blood pressure?" he asked, moving to the operating table where the young girl lay, her small body dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding her. "Dropping fast," another nurse responded. 85/60 and falling. Marcus's jaw set in determination. "We need to stop this internal bleeding now." Scalpel. The next few hours were a blur of focused intensity. Marcus worked tirelessly, his hands steady and sure as he navigated the complex landscape of the girl's injured body. The beeping of monitors and the hiss of equipment provided a constant backdrop to the life-and-death struggle playing out on the operating table. "More suction here," Marcus ordered, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We've got a bleeder." The team moved like a well-oiled machine, anticipating Marcus's needs before he even voiced them. Time seemed to stretch and compress, minutes feeling like hours and hours like minutes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus stepped back from the table. He pulled off his surgical mask, revealing a face etched with exhaustion but glowing with triumph. "We've stabilized her," he announced, his voice hoarse but filled with satisfaction. "Good work, everyone. She's going to make it." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Sarah, the head nurse, patted Marcus on the back. "Another life saved, Dr. Steele." You're a miracle worker. Marcus shook his head modestly. It was a team effort. We all saved her. As he left the operating room, stripping off his surgical gown and gloves, Marcus's thoughts turned to home. He was looking forward to sharing the news of his successful surgery with Vanessa. Maybe it would bridge the growing gap between them, give them something to connect over. The drive home was quick, the streets of their suburban neighborhood quiet in the late evening. As Marcus pulled into the driveway of their modest two-story home, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A sleek, red sports car that seemed out of place among the family sedans and SUVs that usually lined their street. He frowned slightly but shrugged it off. Probably just a visitor to one of the neighbors. He climbed out of his car, his body aching from the hours of intense concentration and physical strain. All he wanted now was a warm shower, a cold beer, and maybe some quality time with Vanessa. It had been too long since they'd really talked. The moment he opened the front door, he heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Frowning, he made his way towards the sound. Something about the tone, the secretive quality of the whispers, set his nerves on edge. "Vanessa?" he called out, announcing his presence. There was a sudden scrambling sound. Then Vanessa's voice rang out, startled and high-pitched. "Marcus, you're home early." Marcus stepped into the living room, taking in the scene before him. Vanessa was perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture tense, her face flushed. Beside her sat Garrett Sloan, their neighbor and Vanessa's yoga instructor. Something about their body language, the guilty looks that flashed across their faces, set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. "I just performed a life-saving surgery," Marcus said, his pride in his accomplishment battling with his growing suspicion. "I thought we could celebrate." Vanessa's response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "Garrett and I were just discussing yoga techniques." Marcus noticed the guilty look that passed between them, but chose not to comment. His instinct screamed that something was amiss, but he maintained his composure. Years of dealing with high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught him the value of staying calm in the face of unexpected challenges. "I see," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Well, don't let me interrupt. I'll be in my study if you need me." As he turned to leave, he caught Garrett's smug whisper, clearly not meant for his ears. "He doesn't suspect a thing." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept walking, his mind whirling with possibilities he didn't want to consider. What exactly didn't he suspect? And why did Garrett sound so pleased about it? In his study, Marcus sank into his leather chair, his earlier triumph forgotten in the face of this new, personal crisis. He stared unseeing at the medical journals stacked neatly on his desk, his mind replaying the scene he'd just witnessed. The guilty looks, the hushed voices, Vanessa's startled reaction to his arrival. None of it added up to anything good. He heard the front door close a few minutes later, followed by the sound of a car starting up outside. Garrett leaving, he presumed. Then Vanessa's light footsteps approached his study. "Marcus," she called softly, poking her head around the door. "I'm heading to bed. Are you coming up soon?" Marcus looked at her, searching her face for what? A sign of guilt? Remorse? He found nothing but a careful blankness that was almost worse. "I'll be up in a bit," he replied. "Just need to review some patient files." Vanessa nodded and retreated, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and suspicions. The next morning, Marcus awoke to find the bed beside him empty and cold. He frowned, glancing at the clock. It was barely 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Vanessa usually slept in on weekends. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed in yoga pants and a fitted top, keys in hand and heading for the door. "Where are you going so early?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual despite the knot of suspicion tightening in his gut. Vanessa startled, nearly dropping her keys. "Oh, Marcus. I didn't realize you were up," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "I have a doctor's appointment." Marcus's suspicions, which had simmered overnight, began to boil. At 7 a.m. on a Saturday, he pressed, unable to keep the skepticism out of his voice. It was the only time they had available, Vanessa replied evasively, not meeting his eyes. She fumbled with her purse, clearly eager to leave. I've got to run. Don't want to be late. As the door closed behind her, Marcus made a split-second decision. He quickly threw on jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed his own keys, and followed her, maintaining a discreet distance in his car. The early morning streets were nearly empty, making it challenging to tail Vanessa without being spotted. Marcus's heart raced, part of him hoping he was wrong, that there was a perfectly innocent explanation for all of this. To his growing dismay, he watched as Vanessa pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript building. The sign out front read, "Fertility Clinic." His heart sank as he recognized Garrett's flashy red sports car already parked there. Moments later, Vanessa and Garrett walked into the clinic together, Garrett's hand resting on the small of Vanessa's back in a gesture that was far too intimate for Marcus's comfort. Marcus sat in his car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The implications were staggering, but he forced himself to think rationally. There could be an explanation. There had to be. He drove to the hospital in a daze, throwing himself into his work to avoid the thoughts swirling in his mind. The day passed in a blur of patients, charts, and procedures. His colleagues noticed his distraction, but chalked it up to fatigue from the previous night's emergency surgery. "You all right, Steele?" Dr. Thompson, the chief of surgery, asked during a brief lull. "You seem a bit off today." Marcus forced a smile. "Just tired from last night's marathon surgery. I'll be fine." As evening approached, Marcus steeled himself for the confrontation he knew was coming. As soon as he walked through the door of his home, he called out, "Vanessa, we need to talk." She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was a mask of forced calm, but Marcus could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. "What about?" Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "I saw you at the fertility clinic with Garrett this morning," he said, deciding to cut straight to the chase. "What's going on, Vanessa?" For a moment, shock flashed across Vanessa's face, quickly replaced by defiance. Her pretense of innocence dropped away like a discarded mask. "Fine," she snapped. "I wanted to keep this private, but since you're prying, Garrett and I want to have a baby together. I was hoping you'd be open to me being a surrogate for his child." Marcus was floored. The room seemed to spin around him, Vanessa's words echoing in his ears. "You can't be serious," he managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my wife." "I'm an independent woman, Marcus," Vanessa snapped, her voice cold and hard. "I can do whatever I want with my body. If you can't accept that, maybe we shouldn't be together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. Marcus felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, all the air driven from his lungs. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Vanessa's chin jutted out defiantly. "Does it matter? Garrett understands me in a way you never have. He supports my choices, my independence." Marcus laughed bitterly. "And I don't? I've always supported your career, your hobbies. I've never tried to hold you back." "It's not about holding me back," Vanessa retorted. "It's about truly seeing me, truly understanding what I need. And what you need is to have another man's baby." Marcus shot back, his calm facade cracking. Vanessa's eyes flashed. "It's not like that. Garrett can't have children of his own. I'm helping a friend." "A friend?" Marcus repeated incredulously. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The conversation devolved from there, years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings bubbling to the surface. By the time it was over, Marcus felt drained, as if he'd just come off a 48-hour shift at the hospital. The following days were filled with a tense, suffocating silence. Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, saving lives and earning accolades at the hospital. It was easier to focus on the pain and suffering of others than to confront his own. "You're on fire lately, Steele," Dr. Thompson commented after Marcus successfully completed a particularly challenging surgery. "Whatever's driving you, keep it up." Marcus just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. If only his colleague knew the personal hell that was fueling his professional success. Meanwhile, at home, Vanessa grew more distant and defiant. She made no attempt to hide her frequent meetings with Garrett, coming and going as she pleased without explanation. One evening, Marcus returned home earlier than usual, his shift cut short due to a scheduling mix-up. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Garrett's flashy red sports car parked in front of their house. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he walked in. The scene that greeted him in the living room made his blood boil. Garrett was lounging on the couch, their couch, the one Marcus and Vanessa had picked out together when they first moved in. His arm draped possessively over Vanessa's shoulders. They both looked up as Marcus entered, Garrett's face twisting into a smug sneer. "Face it, Doc," Garrett drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't give Vanessa what she needs. Step aside like a good boy." Something in Marcus snapped. The accumulated stress, betrayal, and anger of the past weeks crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. His voice was dangerously quiet as he said, "Get out of my house. Now." Garrett's smirk faltered, but he didn't move. Marcus turned to Vanessa, his eyes blazing with a fury she had never seen before. "Pack your things," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "You're leaving too. You can't kick me out." Vanessa protested, jumping to her feet. Her face was a mix of shock and indignation. "This is my home too." Marcus's voice was steel. "Not anymore. I've already contacted my lawyer. Expect divorce papers soon." The finality in his tone seemed to shock both Vanessa and Garrett into action. As they gathered Vanessa's things, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The life they had built together was crumbling, and there would be no going back. As Vanessa and Garrett were leaving, their arms full of hastily packed bags, Garrett couldn't resist one last jab. "You'll regret this, Steele," he called back, his earlier smugness replaced by barely concealed anger. "I have friends in high places." Marcus simply closed the door, shutting out their voices and the life he once knew. As the lock clicked into place, he leaned against the door, suddenly feeling every bit of his exhaustion. But beneath the fatigue, a steely determination was taking root. He walked through the house, now eerily quiet and empty. In the kitchen, he found a bottle of scotch in the back of a cupboard. He rarely drank, but tonight seemed like as good a time as any to start. As he poured himself a glass, his eyes fell on a framed photo on the counter. It was from his and Vanessa's wedding day, both of them beaming at the camera, full of hope for their future together. With a sudden, violent motion, he slammed the frame face down. Sinking into a chair at the kitchen table, Marcus took a long swig of his drink, relishing the burn as it went down. His mind was already formulating a plan. Garrett's parting threat echoed in his ears. Friends in high places, indeed. Well, two could play at that game. Weeks crawled by like wounded animals. Marcus Steele's life had become a monotonous blur of surgeries, rounds, and sleepless nights. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum to his failed marriage. Every corner held a memory he'd rather forget. He threw himself into his work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. His colleagues noticed the change, the intensity that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Steele, you're on fire," Dr. Thompson commented one day after Marcus had performed a particularly challenging thoracic surgery. "I've never seen anything like it." Marcus just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. If they only knew the inferno raging inside him, fueling every incision, every suture. His reputation grew. Whispers in the hospital corridors spoke of his uncanny ability to save patients others had given up on. "Best surgeon in the state," they said. Marcus heard, but didn't care. It was all just noise, a distraction from the gnawing emptiness inside. But surgery wasn't enough. He needed more, needed to feel like he was making a difference beyond the sterile walls of the operating room. That's how he found himself at the local community center one rainy Tuesday evening. "You sure about this, Dr. Steele?" asked Maria, the center's coordinator. "These kids, they're not exactly easy to handle." Marcus looked at the group of teenagers slouching in their chairs, eyes full of suspicion and barely concealed hostility. He saw himself in them, the anger, the pain, the feeling of being lost in a world that didn't care. "I'm sure," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's start with basic first aid. You never know when you might need to save a life." As he demonstrated how to apply pressure to a wound, using a mannequin as a prop, he caught the eye of one of the boys. There was a flicker of interest there, a spark of something that looked almost like hope. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with anger or betrayal. This, he realized, was what healing truly meant. The sessions at the community center became a lifeline, anchoring him to something beyond his pain. He taught first aid, mentored the kids, listened to their stories. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he felt himself starting to heal. But the past wasn't done with him yet. One evening, as he left the hospital after a grueling shift, Marcus noticed a sleek black car idling in the parking lot. As he approached his own vehicle, the black car's engine purred to life. Marcus's hand instinctively went to his pocket, fingers closing around his keys. The black car pulled out, following Marcus as he exited the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, a familiar face came into focus. Garrett Sloan, grinning like a shark that had just scented blood. Instead of fear, Marcus felt a surge of something else. Anticipation. The game, it seemed, was indeed on. He drove calmly, heading not towards home but to a busy shopping center nearby. Garrett followed, maintaining a discreet distance. Marcus pulled into the parking lot, choosing a spot near the entrance of a large bookstore. As he browsed the medical section, pretending to be engrossed in a tome on cardiovascular surgery, he kept one eye on Garrett. The man was lurking near the self-help section, trying and failing to look inconspicuous. Marcus moved closer, ostensibly reaching for a book on the top shelf. As he did, he overheard two nurses from his hospital gossiping in the next aisle. "Did you hear about Dr. Sloan?" one whispered, her voice dripping with scandal. "Apparently, he's been writing fraudulent prescriptions." "No way," her companion gasped. "I always thought there was something off about him." "It's true. My cousin works in pharmacy. Says they've been getting a lot of suspicious scripts lately, all signed by Dr. Sloan." Marcus's ears perked up. He had found Garrett's weakness, the chink in his armor. As he watched Garrett slink out of the bookstore, Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. The tables were about to turn. Marcus Steele was a man on a mission. The information he had overheard in the bookstore was just the beginning. He began his investigation with the meticulousness of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Late nights were spent hunched over his computer, following digital breadcrumbs. He called in favors from old colleagues, spoke in hushed tones with pharmacists, and pieced together a disturbing picture of Garrett Sloan's activities. Garrett, it turned out, was no mere yoga instructor. He styled himself as a holistic healer, offering a blend of Eastern mysticism and Western medicine that appealed to a certain type of wealthy, bored suburban housewife. The same type of woman Vanessa had become, Marcus thought bitterly. But Garrett's healing went beyond downward dogs and chakra alignments. He had been prescribing opioids to his yoga clients, feeding their addictions under the guise of pain management and spiritual awakening. Marcus's stomach turned as he uncovered the extent of Garrett's operation. The man was nothing more than a glorified drug dealer, profiting from the misery and desperation of others. As he compiled his evidence, copies of prescriptions, testimonies from pharmacists, even a recorded conversation with one of Garrett's clients, Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. He would bring this charlatan down, not just for personal revenge, but because it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, life had other plans. His phone buzzed one evening, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Marcus." The voice on the other end was small, hesitant. "Vanessa, what do you want?" He was surprised by the coldness in his own voice. "Can we talk? Please? I've made a terrible mistake." Part of him wanted to hang up, to cut this last tie to his past. But curiosity, and perhaps a lingering ember of what they once had, made him agree to meet. They chose a neutral ground, a small cafe downtown, far from their old haunts. As Marcus walked in, he spotted Vanessa immediately. She looked different. Smaller somehow, diminished. The confident, vibrant woman he had married was gone, replaced by this pale shadow. "I've made a terrible mistake, Marcus," she said as soon as he sat down, not even waiting for pleasantries. "Can we work things out?" Marcus studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. For a moment, he felt a pang of the old affection, the urge to comfort and protect. But then he remembered the betrayal. The lies. Garrett. His voice was kind but firm when he replied, "No, Vanessa. You made your choice. I hope you find happiness, but it won't be with me." He saw the hope die in her eyes, replaced by a resigned acceptance. As he stood to leave, he caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. Garrett, watching from the shadows, his face twisted with rage. Marcus walked out of the cafe, feeling lighter somehow. He had closed a chapter of his life, and now it was time to write a new one that would end with justice being served. The next day dawned bright and clear, a mockery of the storm brewing in Marcus's life. He strode into the hospital, mind already racing with plans for the day's surgeries. But as he approached the administrative wing, he noticed the hushed whispers, the sidelong glances from his colleagues. Something was wrong. Dr. Steele? The hospital administrator's secretary approached him, her face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Jameson would like to see you in his office immediately." Marcus's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "I'll head there now." The walk to Jameson's office felt like a march to the gallows. Marcus's mind raced, trying to piece together what could have prompted this summons. He hadn't made any mistakes in surgery, had he? No, he was certain of that. His work had been impeccable, even more so since. The thought trailed off as he reached Jameson's door. He took a deep breath, straightened his white coat, and knocked. "Come in, Dr. Steele." Marcus entered to find Jameson seated behind his imposing oak desk, his face grave. "Please sit down." As Marcus lowered himself into the chair, Jameson cleared his throat. "Dr. Steele, we've received an anonymous complaint about your conduct. We have to suspend you pending an investigation." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Suspension? Investigation? What the hell was going on? But even as the shock coursed through him, a part of his mind was already piecing it together. Anonymous complaint. Garrett's threat echoed in his memory. "I have friends in high places." Marcus knew immediately who was behind this. But instead of getting angry, he smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile that made Jameson shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I understand," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. May I ask about the nature of the complaint?" Jameson looked relieved at Marcus's calm demeanor. "The complaint alleges inappropriate behavior with patients and possible substance abuse. I want to be clear, Dr. Steele, these are just allegations at this point. But we have to take them seriously." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing ahead. Garrett had overplayed his hand. These accusations were so far from the truth that they would be easy to disprove. And in doing so, he might just be able to turn the tables on his accuser. "Of course," Marcus said, standing up. "I assume you'll need my badge and access card for now?" Jameson nodded, looking both relieved and slightly puzzled by Marcus's composure. "Yes, thank you." "And Dr. Steele? For what it's worth, I hope this all turns out to be a misunderstanding." Marcus handed over his credentials, feeling strangely liberated. "So do I, Mr. Jameson. So do I." As he left the hospital, his head held high despite the curious and pitying glances from his colleagues, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm. This was Garrett's move, and it was a clumsy one. Now it was his turn. The parking lot was nearly empty as Marcus approached his car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. As he reached for his car door, a voice called out from behind him. "How does it feel to lose everything, Doc? Your wife, your job. You should have just played along." Marcus turned slowly to face Garrett, who was leaning against a nearby car, a smug grin plastered across his face. For a moment, Marcus was tempted to wipe that grin off with his fists. But he reined in the impulse. He had a better weapon than violence. "You've made a grave mistake, Garrett," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Garrett's grin faltered for a moment before he forced out a laugh. Big words from a man who just lost everything. "Face it, Steele. You're finished." Marcus allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "We'll see about that." As Garrett swaggered away, clearly believing he had won, Marcus felt a surge of determination. Garrett had no idea of the evidence Marcus had gathered, of the storm that was about to break over him. Marcus got into his car, his mind already formulating the next steps of his plan. Garrett thought he had won this round, but the game was far from over, and Marcus Steele was playing for keeps. The wheels of justice, Marcus Steele had learned, turned slowly, but they did turn. In the weeks following his suspension, he set his plan in motion with the precision of a master surgeon. His first move was to anonymously tip off the DEA about Garrett's prescription fraud. He used a burner phone, his voice disguised, to call in the tip. "You might want to look into Dr. Garrett Sloan," he said. "Word on the street is he's been writing scripts for Oxy like they're going out of style." The DEA agent on the other end of the line perked up. They'd been hearing whispers about a doctor running a pill mill in the suburbs, but names had been hard to come by. "You got any proof to back that up?" the agent asked. Marcus smiled to himself. "Check his prescription records, and maybe have a chat with some of his yoga students. You might find they're more interested in Downward Dog than you'd expect." As he hung up, Marcus felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt. Satisfaction, maybe. Or justice. He pushed the feeling aside. This was necessary. Next, he turned his attention to clearing his own name. He'd spent weeks compiling evidence, records of every surgery he'd performed, testimonials from patients and colleagues, even security footage showing him leaving the hospital at times when he was allegedly engaging in inappropriate behavior. He presented this mountain of evidence to the hospital board, along with a bombshell, proof that Garrett had fabricated the complaints against him. The board meeting was tense. Marcus stood before them, his posture straight, his gaze unwavering. "I've dedicated my life to this hospital and to my patients," he said. "I would never do anything to jeopardize that trust. The allegations against me are not just false, they're malicious." He laid out his case methodically, watching as the board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to outrage. By the time he finished, there was no doubt left in the room. The chairman cleared his throat. "Dr. Steele, we owe you an apology. Not only will you be reinstated immediately, but we'd like to offer you a promotion. Chief of Surgery. Your dedication and integrity are exactly what this hospital needs." Marcus nodded, accepting their apology with grace. But inside, he was seething. How quickly they had been willing to believe the worst of him. How easily his years of service had been dismissed. As he left the meeting, he overheard two board members whispering, "Did you hear about Sloan? His medical license has been suspended pending a full investigation." "DACE involved." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The dominoes were falling, just as he'd planned. But his victory was short-lived. That evening, as he sat in his study, finally allowing himself to relax, his phone rang. The number was blocked, but he answered anyway. "Marcus." The voice on the other end was panicked, breathless. "Vanessa, what do you want?" he asked, his tone cold. "Marcus, please help." Vanessa's voice cracked with fear. "Garrett's lost it. He's threatening to expose some compromising photos of me if I leave him. I don't know what to do." Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, Marcus felt a twinge of concern. He had loved this woman once. He couldn't simply ignore her cry for help, but he wasn't a fool either. This could be useful. "Stay calm," he said, his mind already formulating a new plan. "I'll handle this." As he hung up, Marcus leaned back in his chair. He had dismantled Garrett's life, piece by piece. Now it was time for the final confrontation. The park was deserted at this hour, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. Marcus stood by the old oak tree, hands in his pockets, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Garrett came storming across the lawn, his face twisted with rage. Gone was the smug yoga instructor, the smooth-talking charlatan. This was a man on the edge, desperate and dangerous. "You think you've won?" Garrett snarled as he reached Marcus. "I'll destroy you both." Marcus remained calm, his voice steady. "It's over, Garrett. I have evidence of all your crimes. The prescription fraud, the attempted framing, and now blackmail. You have two choices. Turn yourself in and seek help, or I release everything to the authorities and the media." Garrett's eyes widened, darting around like a cornered animal. For a moment, Marcus thought he might actually consider the offer. But then something snapped. With a roar of fury, Garrett lunged at Marcus, his hands clawing for the doctor's throat. But Marcus was ready. Years of martial arts training kicked in. Marcus sidestepped the attack, using Garrett's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, he had Garrett pinned to the ground, arm twisted behind his back. "You're pathetic, Garrett," Marcus said, his voice cold. "You've lost everything, and it's all your own doing." Garrett struggled, spitting curses, but Marcus held firm. In the distance, sirens wailed. The cavalry was coming. As the police car pulled up, lights flashing, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. Really over. He gave his statement to the officers, watching as they led Garrett away in handcuffs. The man was still shouting threats, promising revenge, but his words were empty now. He had no power left. One of the officers approached Marcus. "Dr. Steele? We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement." Marcus nodded. "Of course. I'll be there first thing in the morning." As he walked away, leaving Garrett and all the chaos behind, Marcus felt lighter. The anger, the bitterness that had been driving him for so long began to ebb away, replaced by a sense of peace. He had faced his demons, had stared into the abyss of revenge, and walked away. He was ready to begin again. Months passed. The seasons changed, leaves falling and snow coming and going. And with each passing day, Marcus felt more like himself again. Or rather, a new version of himself. Stronger, wiser. He stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of eager young faces. Medical students, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to change the world. He remembered being like them once. "Ethics in medicine isn't just about following rules," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the lecture hall. "It's about making the right choices, especially when those choices are difficult." He saw a few students nodding, others scribbling notes furiously. Good. They were listening. "You will face challenges in your careers. Ethical dilemmas that no textbook can prepare you for. When that happens, remember this. Your integrity is your most valuable asset. Guard it carefully." As he wrapped up the lecture, fielding questions from the students, Marcus felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This was why he became a doctor. Not for the accolades or the money, but to make a difference. To help people. After the hall had emptied, Marcus checked his phone. There was a text waiting for him. From Vanessa. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can forgive me someday." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. So much history there. So much pain. But also, closure. He typed out a simple reply. "I wish you well, Vanessa. Goodbye." As he sent the message, Marcus felt the last lingering traces of bitterness melt away. He had forgiven her, he realized. Not for her sake, but for his own. The drive home was peaceful. Marcus found himself reflecting on the tumultuous journey he'd been through. He had lost a wife, yes, but he had gained so much more. Clarity, purpose, a renewed sense of who he was and what he stood for. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw a familiar figure waiting for him. Dr. Sophia Chen, brilliant neurosurgeon and, for the past few months, his girlfriend. She smiled as he got out of the car, her eyes lighting up in a way that still made his heart skip a beat. "How was the lecture?" she asked, pulling him into a warm embrace. "Good," Marcus replied, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "I think they actually listened for once." Sophia laughed, a sound that never failed to lift his spirits. "Of course they did. You're Marcus Steele, ethical crusader and surgical wizard. How could they not listen?" As they walked into the house together, discussing their days and planning for tomorrow, Marcus felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This, he realized, was what he had been searching for all along. Not revenge or validation, but understanding, support, love. The sun was setting over their suburban home, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was the end of one chapter, yes, but more importantly, it was the beginning of another, a better one. Marcus Steele had not just survived. He had triumphed. He had faced his trials and emerged stronger, wiser, more compassionate. And as he looked at Sophia, saw the love and respect shining in her eyes, he knew that the best was yet to come.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, Please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Reclaiming my life after discovering my wife's 20-year affair and overcoming the pain of cheating. You never expect it to happen to you, but friends endure the pain of divorce for various reasons. Trusting and loving your partner, you never think you'll join the ranks of failed marriages. Yet when you glance at divorce rates, especially nowadays, you question the institution of marriage itself. The vow, "till death do us part," rings hollow, its significance faded over time. Perhaps I should have noticed the signs, not just from online sources, stories, articles, or simply by being more attentive. Love often tints our perception positively. Despite having a family and a life together, the notion of growing old with someone feels unsettling. Yet the signs were there, and I had glimpsed them before. My upbringing labeled us a single-parent household eventually. Back then, my parents' marriage seemed robust, filled with love and respect. My father toiled hard, his laborious job taking a toll, but he prioritized his family's well-being. Meanwhile, my mother returned to work when my younger sister began school. As children, we were oblivious, but hindsight revealed the signs, unraveling the truth. Her affair didn't commence immediately. I was a teenager when it began, with my brother slightly younger and my sister 3 years junior. It unfolded like many illicit romances do: late work hours, business trips, sudden grooming improvements. Upon returning from rendezvous without smartphones, clandestine calls and unexplained disappearances marked my mother's interactions. The affair's exposure occurred when my father stumbled upon them. He had wrapped up work early, intending to surprise my mother with an outing. She had claimed a half-day for hairstyling and shopping. Instead, he returned home to find her car in the driveway alongside another he recognized. Entering through the back, he discovered his wife, my mother, with her boss in their bed. Enraged, my father confronted him. The man, Jim Thompson, left our house battered. My father quickly realized that infidelity held no weight in a no-fault divorce country. Some argue possession is 9/10 of the law. Attempting to oust her from the house, he faced resistance from my mother's family. With the house in both their names, she refused to leave. Caught in a bind, staying would thwart divorce, requiring a year of separate living. Despite trying to evict her for infidelity, it wasn't legally enforceable. No-fault divorces can feel unjust, especially when infidelity leads to the split without repercussions. Eventually, my father moved out, unable to find a place for us all. I confronted my mother, planning to move in with him soon. My younger siblings were unaware, puzzled by our father's absence. During that tumultuous year, my mother maintained our visits with our father, who struggled emotionally. He confided in me, admitting we were his sole motivation. He aimed for custody and a home, a distant hope in a system biased against men. Despite my desire to live with him, custody favored my mother, as my siblings were deemed too young to decide, leaving us in her care. A silver lining for my father was Australia's lack of alimony. Though spousal maintenance exists, it's not always granted. With our mother earning well, he only had to pay reasonable support. Unlike the US, Australian child support is fair for the non-residential parent. This spared my father from financial ruin. The following 4 years were tough. I resented my mother, making it clear to any suitor she brought home. By 16, I left her in tears. We barely spoke, and I avoided home as much as possible. Post-divorce, my father found love with Naomi, also divorced. I embraced their relationship, and she became a loving figure to us. Despite his reluctance to remarry, they lived together happily. When I turned 18, I left home, unable to tolerate my mother. My parting words were harsh, reflecting years of pent-up frustration. Despite our rift, she cried as I left. I reassured my siblings and promised to stay connected before bidding my mother farewell. My mother's experience made me cautious with women. Aware of my monogamous nature, I sought the same in a partner. After reading numerous articles on infidelity post-high school, I dated casually, aiming to find someone deserving of my trust and love. At 21, working as an engineer and pursuing advancement through night classes, I met Kylie, a recent university grad. I met her at a corporate event where I represented an engineering company while she worked part-time as a sales rep for another firm. We hit it off instantly, and by day's end I had her number, promising to call. "Got a hot date?" Mark, my roommate, teased. We had agreed to share expenses to save money. Something like that. "Is this the girl from the conference?" "Yeah." Finally mustered up the courage to call. I smirked. "Back off, Dave. Just wait a couple of days not to seem too eager." Trust me. She was thrilled when I called and eager to meet. After applying aftershave, I felt confident. Not wanting to look unkempt, despite a decent job, finances were tight, but I felt comfortable. We agreed to meet at a local bar, taking things step by step. I typically avoided dinner on first dates to sidestep the free meal scenario. Entering the bar, I spotted her on a stool, already enjoying her drink. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and my heart raced. Over drinks, we opened up. She confessed her temporary role in the corporation, chosen for her looks, attracting unwanted attention from married men. It disgusted her, and I understood her frustration. While my mother's infidelity was known to me, I discovered that both genders were equally guilty of cheating. Researching online statistics, I was shocked by the high number of men and women admitting to extramarital affairs. Articles in Australia portrayed us as notorious cheaters. "You were a perfect gentleman," she said, holding my hand. "You maintained eye contact and remained professional until asking for my number. You were genuine. I just wish you were single," I assured her of my single status, vouching for myself through my friends. She smiled, expressing her trust. Having been hurt before, we took it slow at first, meeting for coffee or drinks during the initial weeks. On the third night, we shared our first kiss over drinks. Knowing about each other's family backgrounds, it felt right, and we both sensed it. Soon, drinks turned into dinner, and a week later, we made love for the first time at my apartment. A month later, she confessed her love, and I reciprocated. Despite my father's past, Kylie had won my heart. As she found a stable job, we discussed serious matters like living together, buying a house, and starting a family. We agreed to buy a house together before marriage, luckily avoiding the housing boom in Australia. However, due to her bad credit history, she couldn't co-borrow on the mortgage. My father stepped in as a co-borrower, saving the day. Kylie was deeply grateful to him, and her parents adored me. 3 months after moving into our new home, I proposed, and our engagement and wedding plans were met with joy. Marrying Kylie was the happiest day of my life. We exchanged vows in a park, surrounded by loved ones, both grinning with happiness as we committed to each other. Our honeymoon, a week on a Pacific island, led to the discovery of her pregnancy. 9 months later, our beautiful daughter was born, followed by a son 18 months later. Deciding 2 children were plenty, she opted against surgery, instead choosing birth control. She balanced motherhood with part-time work until both kids reached middle school, then resumed full-time employment. By our mid-40 seconds, I was a regional manager for engineering companies, often traveling. Kylie ran her own real estate office, occasionally visiting the CBD headquarters. Our daughter moved out to live with her boyfriend, while our son pursued university studies. Married for over 20 years, our love remained strong. Though I could admire other women, my heart belonged to Kylie, and I never strayed. My father's experience always lingered in my thoughts. I should have been more vigilant, seeing the signs earlier. When I finally acknowledged the truth, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. "You never think it'll happen to you." "Do you think she's cheating?" Dave asked, surprise evident. "Buddy, she adores you." I was naive, Dave. I hoped our relationship would improve once Steve left, but her behavior resembles my mother's. The thought of that woman made my blood boil. I barely interacted with her over the past 2 decades. She attended my wedding, but only because my father insisted. Now married to Naomi and retired, he urged me to extend the invitation. I complied reluctantly, feeling pressured not to appear as the villain. Besides occasional texts about her seldom visited grandchildren, I kept my distance. Kylie understood and didn't push for a relationship with her either. "What's your plan?" "Gather evidence and leave her if she's cheating." "Or how?" "I have ways. Lately she's been unusually secretive. My fault for trusting her. Now I'm preparing for the worst, meeting with a private investigator Monday to confirm suspicions. No need for photos, just evidence. It's a shame you can't divorce for infidelity." "True, but early defense can help." Luckily, she waited until the kids were out. "Plus, there are details in our lives she's overlooked that could help." He sympathized, patting my shoulder. "I'm sorry, buddy." Sipping my beer, I confessed, "Me too. Can't stop loving her until I'm sure. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but the signs are there." The next morning, I visited Dad. Seeing my troubled expression, he offered a beer and patience. He and Naomi, still deeply in love, reminded me of their enduring bond. Though their initial relationship was short-lived, Dad wanted her as his wife. "I suspect Kylie's having an affair," sighed Naomi. Dad muttered, "Not again." "I'll hire a PI Monday." "The signs are clear, Dad. Same signs you mentioned with Mom. She's read a manual on infidelity evasion, it seems, but I woke up." "What's the plan?" I smirked. Naomi chuckled, sensing my grim expression. "Dad, I'll transfer my house to you. Kylie's name isn't on the mortgage. Legally, we own it. When I'm gone, she's a tenant. I'll gift you the house by removing my name from the deed as per state and federal law. Then we sign a lease. After the divorce, I'll outline how to legally evict her if needed." Thought this through? Naomi asked. Kylie knew our terms on fidelity. She breaks them, she's out, no alimony or support. Thankfully, I won't fund a cheater. I sipped my beer, vexed. Hope I'm wrong. Returning home, Kylie lounged on the couch, greeting me warmly. Where were you? She asked. Just talked with Dad about a job, I replied. Suspicions gnawed at me. Lacking concrete evidence of her wrongdoing, if she was unfaithful, it wasn't with someone she saw daily. I dreaded the possibility of sudden girls' nights out. Despite occasional late work nights, she assured me of her love, but doubts lingered. The idea of her betraying me sickened me, yet without proof, I had to trust her, albeit cautiously. Monday arrived and I went to work as usual. Despite our routine breakfast and affectionate exchanges, I harbored plans to meet a PI at lunch to monitor Kylie. After 2 decades of marriage, it was unsettling to find myself hiring a detective reminiscent of old detective movies. She noticed my surprise and with a smile detailed the process and costs. Will she notice the money movements? No, we have separate accounts but share one for her bills. Why suspect an affair? I recounted my mother's infidelity, my father's discovery, and our current situation. How's your bed life? She probed. Started well after our son left but slowed 6 months back. I'd have closeness nightly if possible. Observed changes in her behavior. Yes, subtle ones. Enough for suspicion. I grinned, not a full communist parade but enough red flags. She outlined services, including phone tapping and surveillance, admitting some might be legally murky. I clarified it wasn't a permanent affair unless I was blind. I had no clue if she was meeting someone during lunch, working late, or seeking occasional flings. I just wanted the truth. Given time to ponder, I'd initiate surveillance next week. Giving up closeness was tough. Unsure of her fidelity, the idea of sharing her made me uneasy. I could have feigned illness, but honesty prevailed. I wasn't interested. Rejecting her advances likely puzzled her. She queried if work stressed me, and I, preoccupied, confirmed. She reaffirmed her love as always. I called Wednesday, initiating surveillance. Doubts gnawed, wondering if it was all in my head. Despite evidence from the investigation, it took a month of resistance for her infidelity to surface. Meanwhile, I immersed myself in literature on cheating spouses, prepared for a marital breakdown. I began preparations, assembling an evacuation bag and moving belongings to the car. Workers knew I'd be leaving soon. I just needed to set a date. Our home was solely in my father's name now, and my wife wasn't mentioned in the lease. Hopefully, she'd be out within a few months. It was Friday evening, and I arrived home as usual. Typically, Kylie would be in the living room enjoying TV and wine. We'd order takeout, chat about our week, cuddle, and head to bed. Fridays were usually great, especially since the kids moved out. We'd make love all weekend, but this time, I heard her bustling in the bathroom, which struck me as cliché. I grabbed a beer and settled on the couch in darkness, waiting for her. When she emerged, instead of the expected seductive attire, she wore a colorful blouse, short skirt, stockings and heels, with styled hair and makeup. She looked stunning, though it wasn't for me. It took a moment for me to realize, "Oh, Mark, I didn't realize you were here." I arrived home at my usual time, Kylie. You seem pretty occupied getting ready for whatever you have planned. Where are you off to? She hesitated. I have a date tonight, Mark, with John from work, just a work thing. It was a blatant lie. I knew John, her affair partner from her company's head office. He was married with kids around our age. I'm not sure what she expected me to do, but there comes a point when a man washes his hands of it all. If she thought I'd beg or plead, she didn't know me. I stood up, meeting her eyes as I approached. She flinched and I smiled, heading to the kitchen. Aren't you going to say anything, Mark? No. She had no clue how ready I was. We were both good at pretending, but I wasn't going to deceive her with lies. Fair enough. I'll be back later. We'll talk then. I didn't respond, but followed her to the door. She glanced back, looking uncertain. Whether it was guilt or not, I didn't care anymore. Good night, Mark, she murmured. Goodbye, Kylie. She likely understood my unspoken message, but perhaps she thought I'd tolerate it like those other men. But I wasn't going to be a betrayed man. I wouldn't stand for it. I had no interest in open marriages or any of that. It undermines, degrades, and completely disregards the marriage vows. Once she departed, I sprang into action, grabbing my evacuation bag and another suitcase. I loaded them into the car. Thankful for modern technology, I handled everything online or through phone apps. Our debt was minimal, just one credit card, which I promptly paid off and canceled. After settling upcoming bills, I transferred most of our joint savings to my account, leaving her enough for a couple of months' expenses. With possession being 9/10 of the law and the house in my name, she'd soon realize she was on her own. Walking through the now tainted memories of our home, I sighed, sipping my beer. I had 3 calls to make, one easy, the other 2 daunting. Dad, she's confirmed. She's cheating. She admitted she's going on a date tonight. The plan starts now. Where are you off to? Adelaide. New job for a year. After the divorce, back to Sydney. That's the plan. Got it, son. I'll keep your whereabouts under wraps. New number? Sorting it out on arrival. We'll send my address. Drive safe and stay smart. Dad, I'm just leaving a cheater. Feel like history repeating. You've done nothing wrong, Mark. Find peace. Move on. We love you. Kids? No, not yet. Thanks, Dad. Talk soon. Calling my kids was tough. First, my daughter. She cried hearing it. Heartbreaking. I reassured her of my love, but I'm leaving for now. We'll email new details. As for my son, he took it stoically, calling his mom a cheat. He only asked what I'd do about him. I'll find him and tell his wife the truth. No revenge, Steve. This is real life, not some made-up story. I'm heartbroken right now, but all I'll do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'll only be 46 when it happens. Can she demand counseling? Our marriage and divorce laws are different. Forget about those stories. Based on state laws, as long as we've lived apart for 12 months, I can file for divorce. I won't even be required to attend court, though I will, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. She can't demand counseling after 20 years of marriage? Steve, be careful. You know how tricky the courts can be. If she's persistent enough, then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor, put the pictures in front of them, and ask them if they'll stay married to the woman who's cheating on them. Okay, Dad. Take care of yourself and keep in touch when you get to where you're going. I'll keep you in the loop, as I believe Mom will be contacting me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk soon. That was it. I left Kylie a brief note mentioning my departure and that my father would contact her. No explanation given, leaving it as a surprise. I notified our children, as my father had done. If her parents inquire, I'll share proof if necessary. I left my wedding ring on the coffee table with the note and copies of evidence, keeping the originals. Driving away from the house, I felt a weight lift. I booked a hotel outside the city to plan my move to Adelaide. Taking 2 weeks, I explored small towns along the way. In Adelaide, colleagues welcomed me and showed me around. I chose a modern apartment in North Adelaide, opting not to buy due to high prices. I planned to return to Sydney after a year. Once settled, I updated my family on my new location. Charlotte called right away, eager to visit. I missed her terribly, so I arranged for her to fly over for a month. My son was wrapping up his studies, planning to visit me for Christmas, a mere 3 months away. Meanwhile, my father updated me on Kylie's activities. Did you know she didn't come home until the next morning? Yes, I replied. I held off on interrupting the private investigators curious about her actions that night. They went to dinner, had a romantic evening, and spent the night in a city hotel. Satisfied, I thanked the investigators and settled their fees, as their services were no longer needed. Later, my father informed me of Kylie's reaction upon discovering the note, evidence, and my absence. She called hysterically, contacted our children and her family, but I ignored her calls and marked her emails as spam. A week later, I confronted her with the lease and house ownership documents. She realized the situation was legally binding and had 3 months to find a new home or face eviction by the police. Despite still residing there, my father sensed she intended to move out. Has she inquired about me? Certainly. She's asked about your family, kids, friends, even your workplace. She's consumed by guilt for discarding our 20-year bond. Has she offered any explanation? Not really. She's remorseful, sure, but it's the same story as your mother's, sorry for being caught, not for the infidelity. Cheaters often live in a delusion where they think they're blameless. They claim it was just physical, but I never strayed for mere physicality. Even in my 30 seconds and 40 seconds I had offers, but I stayed true to my vows because I loved my wife. I found love again with Naomi, Mark. Take time to heal, grieve your marriage, and when you're ready, welcome someone new into your life. There are countless good women out there. Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Work became my refuge, keeping me occupied. I traveled across South Australia visiting stores and suppliers and spent weekends exploring the Barossa Valley. Divorce transformed me into a firm negotiator, unwilling to compromise unless it benefited my company. Fortunately, my bosses were pleased with my performance and even suggested I stay in Adelaide permanently. A month after settling into my apartment, my daughter visited. At the airport, she joyfully shouted, "Daddy!" and ran into my arms. We spent a week together, and despite my work commitments, I prioritized our time. During our conversations, she revealed that her mother had bombarded her with calls, attempting to justify her actions. Reluctantly, I showed her the evidence I had. As she read, tears streamed down her face, and she expressed her anger toward her mother. Despite assuring her of her mother's love, I feared it would take a long time, if ever, for her to forgive her. The day she departed was painful for both of us, knowing she wished to stay for my sake. We embraced for what felt like an eternity before she had to go. Throughout the months of my marriage crumbling, I remained stoic, harboring more anger than sorrow. However, as my daughter drove away, I couldn't hold back tears, realizing the depth of my loneliness. Yet her visit rejuvenated me, and I found solace in nightly conversations with her, frequent calls from my son, and promises of support from my siblings. My father kept me updated on developments, while old colleagues from Sydney reached out for casual chats and laughs, offering a semblance of comfort amidst the turmoil. About 6 weeks before Christmas, lightning struck once more. Strolling through the aisles of the nearby supermarket, I found myself in a state of boredom. Grocery shopping used to be a joyful activity with Kylie, filled with laughter and goofiness. As I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, I collided with another shopper reaching for the same item. Our eyes met in surprise. "I think I startled you," I admitted. "No, my fault entirely. I didn't see you there." "Please take the bottle. I'll find something else." She insisted, "But it's the last one," I replied with unexpected confidence. I proposed, "How about this? You take the bottle, and we grab coffee afterward." Struck by her touch and captivated by her beauty, I extended my hand. "I'm Mark." Her smile illuminated her face as she replied, "I'm Jennifer." Sensing her soft skin as we shook hands, I asked, "Do you often meet men in supermarkets?" "Mark," I chuckled. "No, you're the first." "And are you single?" "If not, I'll retract my invitation, but if you are, I hope you'll accept." She had shoulder-length brunette hair and wore thin-rimmed black glasses that accentuated her bright blue eyes and small nose. With full natural lips and a classically beautiful face, I couldn't guess her age. Despite my curiosity, I restrained myself from sizing her up, though I figured she was shorter than me by about 6 inches. Her smile suggested she liked what she saw. "I'd love to grab coffee. Can I have your number?" After exchanging numbers, she texted, "I'll finish shopping in about half an hour, then head home to put things away. But I can meet you in a couple of hours if you'd like." "Are you local?" I asked. "Yes, I live nearby," she replied. "Same here. I avoid long drives just for groceries. Let me know where you'll be, and I'll meet you there." Moving the cart ahead, she rested a hand on my forearm. "See you soon, Mark. It's been too long since I've had a date." At the coffee shop, I caught her tone and met her gaze, sensing the pain mirrored in her eyes, a reflection of my own struggles. "I'll text you once I'm home and let you know where to find me." Finishing my shopping, I hurried home, storing everything away before showering and changing. Before leaving, I texted Jennifer about meeting at a nearby coffee shop I enjoyed, and she responded, mentioning she frequented the same spot and wondered if we'd crossed paths before. I'll admit I felt a bit nervous waiting for her. Though I dated my wife throughout our marriage, this was my first real date in 20 years. When Jennifer arrived, she seemed overdressed but stunning in a sundress. After getting drinks, we talked and got to know each other. Jennifer confessed she was amazed by my confidence in asking her out at the supermarket. "When you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something," she admitted, blushing but shaking her head at the idea of it being just her imagination. I've read about such connections, but I always thought they were just stories. As she extended her hand, we shared a smile, and as I grasped it, she whispered, "I felt it again, definitely from my side." We didn't delve too deep into our stories, especially on a first date. I recognized her name and noticed her bare left hand, though remnants of a ring were evident. She worked as a kindergarten teacher but had no children of her own, residing solo in a small apartment with a handful of close friends. Her parents and younger sister lived in the city, and she revealed she was 35 years old. "Oh," I responded. "I'm 45. "Your age doesn't matter, Mark. What matters is the kind of person you are," she assured me, prompting me to admit my recent breakup. Seeing her anxious expression, I suggested another drink, sensing the need for an explanation, though reluctant to divulge everything on our first encounter. She surprised me by saying, "No, Mark, I trust you for now. I can see you're hurting. Is it that obvious?" "I've seen the same look in the mirror," she confessed, taking my hand and offering comfort. "It gets easier day by day. Eventually, the person who broke your heart won't matter anymore." With a reassuring smile, she added, "And then perhaps you'll meet someone who begins to mend it. It may take time, but it happens." My father always said the same thing. "Your dad's got some wisdom," I remarked as we polished off our second glass and headed outside. Approaching her car, I felt a bit uncertain. Should I kiss her, hug her, or just bid her farewell? Opting for a hug, I found myself reluctant to let go, surprised by the intensity of my attraction to her, yet eager to explore it further. It seems she felt the same, neither of us wanting to break the embrace. "Give me a ring this week, Mark. I'd love to chat again." "How about tonight?" Her giggle tugged at my heartstrings. "Feel free to call any time." That night, and every night after, I dialed her number. I suggested Friday dinner to avoid disrupting her regular teaching schedule. When she agreed, I couldn't contain my excitement, practically dancing around my apartment after we hung up. At Thursday's conference, my upbeat mood sparked comments, with everyone assuming I was seeing someone. To avoid jinxing it, I mentioned my coffee shop date and upcoming dinner with the same person, stating I preferred dating one woman at a time. Opting for a restaurant with stellar reviews, I dressed smartly, despite its casual vibe. Upon arriving, I found Jennifer already there, looking nervous. Without hesitation, I leaned in for a kiss, which she reciprocated. "Wow," she whispered. "If that's how you greet me, I can't wait for our second date." As we were seated in a cozy booth, our conversation flowed effortlessly. We split appetizers and desserts, enjoying each other's company and losing track of time amidst captivating conversation and shared glances. The meal was excellent, and the service was attentive yet unobtrusive. I settled the bill and suggested heading to Holland's for another drink, which Jennifer readily agreed to. Leading her there, I chose a tranquil bar with soothing piano music in the background. Jennifer sipped a cocktail while I enjoyed a bourbon. Eventually, she asked what was on my mind, and I poured out my thoughts, our meeting, our lives, our children, and our careers. Then I opened up about my father's struggles, my strained relationship with my mother, their divorce, and how it made me realize my own marriage was crumbling. I confessed that I was technically still married but separated, relocating to finalize the divorce. I assured Jennifer that if she saw my actions as cheating, I wouldn't hold it against her. My marriage was effectively over. The legal process was just a formality. I explained that I would return to Sydney to complete it, and that if she were to meet someone in Adelaide, we'd need to discuss our options. Being away from my kids in Sydney was tough, and the thought always weighed on me. I missed them every day. Jennifer shared her own story, revealing that her ex-husband was charismatic but controlling. Ignoring her parents' warnings, she fell in love at 19 with a man 6 years her senior. Initially, she didn't notice the warning signs, but gradually he isolated her from family and friends. Forced to work and serve as his maid, her situation only worsened over time. I stood up to him, which he saw as disrespect toward him. Whether it was my clothes or coming home late, he accused me of cheating. If I spent money on myself, he called me financially irresponsible. There was never any positivity from him. He was always negative. "I doubt he'd ever say anything good about you, Jennifer," I whispered. I knew I had to get away. He was unstable, and I feared he'd either hurt me physically, sending me to the hospital, or completely break me. Tears streaming down my face, I called my father, begging him to rescue me. He arrived with 2 uncles and friends. My ex-husband tried to fight them off, but facing men was different from attacking a woman. With a single punch, my father subdued him, and they tied him to a chair while helping me move out. I immediately sought help from the police, getting a restraining order and an AVO against him. It's been 7 years since our divorce, and he has no idea where I am. I've hardly dated Mark. Fear has consumed me for so long. She looked into my eyes, her own searching. Then, I met you, and emotions I hadn't felt in ages flooded back. I never felt them for him. She sat behind the wheel, but I sensed she wasn't in a condition to drive, so I offered to take her home instead. Pausing in front of an apartment building, I remembered considering it before choosing my current place. After walking her to the door, she hesitated, so I took the initiative, pulling her close for another kiss. "I had a wonderful night, Jennifer. I'd love to do it again this week." "Any night works for me. I'm a pretty good cook." "How about dinner?" "I'll bring something too. I'm not too shabby in the kitchen myself." She grinned. "Let's make it a cook-off. Wednesday sound good?" "Perfect, Mark. And expect your usual nightly call tomorrow." "How about the beach? Just want to have fun." When I arrived home, I waited until I was settled on the couch with a beer before checking my phone. "Had a great night, Mark. Wanted you to stay, but let's take it slow." "Agreed. Bring clothes Wednesday, too. Early for more than sleep." "Mark, tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer." "Me too. My bed feels empty since you." "Picking you up at 9 a.m., breakfast and beach, your favorite color?" "Usually blue. On a woman, black or red." "Perfect. See you, Mark." "Sweet dreams. Beautiful." The last message was a heart-stopper. The next morning, Jennifer honked outside. She greeted me inside, joking about needing a broom for the men. After breakfast, we hit the beach, spending the day there, occasionally cooling off in the water. Or drink? Love to, but don't want to leave. Change and come back for drinks. Stay the night, she whispered. I dashed into the house, quickly packed a bag and hurried to her place. Out of breath, I knocked, and she laughed, pulling me inside. The next morning she made breakfast and we lounged around her apartment all day. The silence between us was comfortable. No rush, Jenny, I whispered. We have time. I realized I was already in love with her, hoping it wasn't just a rebound from my recent divorce. But I wanted to believe it was fate that brought us together at the supermarket that day. We didn't text much during the day due to her teaching schedule, but we spoke every night. My CO workers knew I was seeing someone, and I informed my family in Sydney about her. My dad updated me on Kylie's situation. She was close to moving out and still searching for me. Wednesday night arrived eagerly. Jennifer prepared a delightful dinner, and her dessert struck a chord with me. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, I chuckled, patting my belly. I love you, she whispered, turning to kiss me. I love you too, I replied with a smile. Isn't it too soon, she questioned. Not at all, Jenny. I knew from our first date that you're the one I want to spend my life with, and if being closer to your kids means moving, I'm in, I assured her. Are you sure? She asked. My heart says yes, I affirmed. Let's see how it goes. That night, she visited my apartment for the first time, finding it a bit bachelor-like but clean and tidy, understanding it was just a temporary residence. When marriage was mentioned, she blushed and turned away. Her wrist gently held. I confessed I was already contemplating it. Jenny, I can't recall feeling this much love since Kylie. Not because she hurt me, but maybe it's the freshness, maybe age and experience, but I love you, Jennifer Morris. One day, I want to be Jennifer Williams, she whispered in response. For the next few weeks, we were inseparable, spending every night together, mostly at her nicer apartment. I kept my kids updated, but they wanted to meet her before talking more. Before Christmas, I asked my son about his mother. I told her I wouldn't be there, he said. She probably knew you weren't in Sydney, he added. Elle's not talking to her much either. My sister would visit soon. Are you sure you want to leave, Dad? My son asked. We're all considering moving there to be closer to you, he added. Jennifer squeezed my hand, showing support. Think it through, Steve, my son advised. I know it's a big step, he added. Trust me, Dad, you're more important, he reassured. Jennifer looked at me surprised. I still need to go back for the divorce, I reminded. Just don't rush it, my son cautioned. I know, but leaving your mother was planned, I explained. To hell with her, my son declared. Jennifer accompanied me to the airport when my daughter arrived, bringing her husband, Tom. Charlotte rushed into my arms, reminiscent of our joyful reunions. After school, tears flowed as I introduced them, evoking an emotional moment. The next day, my son surprised me at my apartment door, and we shared a heartfelt hug. Jennifer remarked on our resemblance, though I had already confirmed paternity. Later, I drove us to Jennifer's parents' house. I unloaded a trunk full of gifts at Jennifer's parents' house. Her mother adored my daughter instantly, and I'm certain they welcomed my son like a grandchild. I video called my father for Christmas wishes while my extended family celebrated with him. Meanwhile, Kylie had moved in with her parents after her affair partner was ousted, and she faced job repercussions. My kids documented the day on social media, though I found little interest in it. Despite old friends reaching out, I focused on finalizing my divorce and returning to Sydney. Christmas with Jennifer's family was delightful. I surprised her with a beautiful necklace and bracelet, hinting at our future together. She was thrilled and promised to wear them often, her eyes shining with gratitude. After a hearty lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up in his garage, tinkering with an old sports car. Jenny seems happier lately, Mark. Leaving Adelaide might be good for her. Are you okay with staying here? Indefinitely. I'll stick around for her, and my kids will move closer, I confirmed. How soon can you finalize the divorce? Probably a few months at most. I've been honest with Jenny. I heard she's been giving you a hard time. Yeah, it might take up to 6 months. I only had solid evidence recently, I explained. He shook his head in disgust. I've heard about this cheating mess. Why get married if you can't stay faithful? Ever heard of betrayed men? He seemed familiar with the term. Yeah, it's messed up. Jenny's ex-husband was both a cheater and an abuser. What? He laid a hand on my shoulder. She hardly knew about the cheating, but he was doing it with anyone who caught his eye. She loves you, Mark. Just don't hurt her, he said softly. I nearly destroyed her. I love her more than anything in this world. Daddy, she interjected, smiling. We've both been through pain, so we support each other. We stayed until late afternoon and my daughter drove us home. After a few drinks, Jennifer and I went to our bedroom. If the day was good, New Year's Eve was even better. I took her to a downtown hotel where we had dinner and drinks. Back in our room, champagne awaited us. "Any New Year's wishes?" I asked. "I want us to live here together," she said. "Deal. And I want you to propose as soon as your divorce is final." "I'm already looking at rings," she said, holding me closer. "I want a baby," she whispered. "We'll start a family together," I assured her. My children left a few days later. Though reluctant to see them go, I explained I might stay in Adelaide. I told my father the same, and he promised to visit whenever possible. The following months were filled with happiness. I applied for a lease and moved in with Jennifer. Though it wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was real life, and I've never been happier. We faced the specter of my divorce and lingering trust issues, but we committed to open communication. Our bond strengthened. Being with her uplifted me. She inspired me to be a better man, and her love prompted me to buy an engagement ring before my return to Sydney. Jennifer was more nervous than I during the flight, aware of potential challenges ahead. My dad greeted us at the airport, along with my siblings and kids. We'd be staying with him during the divorce proceedings. I'd already filed the papers, but Kylie was contesting it. Surprisingly, I hadn't seen her in 12 months. "I've met all the legal requirements," I stated. "I've been in Adelaide for a year, and she hasn't been with me." "True, but she may still argue," my lawyer replied. "But no judge will entertain her claims nor mandate counseling." "Is Jennifer your partner?" "Yes, and once the divorce is final, we'll marry and start a family," Jennifer interjected. "I'll contact her lawyer," my lawyer concluded. 3 days later, my attorney said Kylie would sign, making it a joint petition if I talked to her. The case would proceed smoothly. "My lawyer suggests I speak to her," I told Jennifer. "You're with Jennifer now, starting a new family." "Are you still angry?" my dad asked. "Not really. Let her have her say, then let's move forward," I assured him. The following week, we were in court. Once she signed, the judge would approve our divorce, and I'd be free. A month after the divorce decree, I hadn't seen Kylie since she left for her date. As we entered the room with my attorney, Kylie looked shocked to see me with another woman. Ignoring her, I ensured Jennifer was comfortable, holding her hand on the table while she leaned on my shoulder. Finally, I faced Kylie. To be frank, she looked terrible. I'd heard that Kylie's life had been tough since I left her. I had no sympathy for her at all. She made a choice that cost her everything. She has no contact with our daughter, and our son barely speaks to her. My whole family cut ties with her. Even her own family was disappointed but felt obliged to accept her once my father kicked her out. "Speak up, Kylie, so we can finalize this divorce. I want to move on with my life. You're in the past where you belong." "Who is she?" she asked quietly. "That's Jennifer Morris. After the divorce, I'll propose to her. She'll soon be Jennifer Williams." "I'll gladly accept his proposal because I want to be his wife and the mother of his children," Jennifer added. "Once she says yes, we'll plan a simple wedding. Hopefully by then she'll be pregnant." I could see the pain in Kylie's eyes. I still knew her well. "You bounced back pretty fast," she observed. "I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie. I remember the evidence I found. You never gave me an explanation. I left that night, and you said nothing. You didn't fight for us. I didn't need to fight because I was your husband, so in the end you weren't worth fighting for. You betrayed me, Kylie. After 20 years together, you showed your true colors. We discussed monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you were like my mother, I'd leave. You made my decision easier. Do you even regret it? Don't bother answering. You don't regret it. You regret getting caught, not exposing our marriage as a sham. You're just like my mother." Her lawyer interjected. I glared at him. "Back off. If you don't like it, she wants to talk. I have the right to speak too." "I made a mistake." "Treason isn't a mistake. It's a series of decisions. Whether he seduced you or not doesn't matter. You slept with him and lost the right to call me your husband. It was just lovemaking. And there it is, the phrase so many use to justify their actions. But for most, lovemaking means love. As my wife, it should have been me, not some idiot from work. We talked about this before we married, Kylie. I warned you what would happen if you cheated. My mother cheated too. Once I realized what you were doing, I gathered proof. Even if you said no that night, I would have left, but you disrespected me. You took all our money. No, I gave it to my father, who still owns it. He'll sell it and give me most of the money. You didn't deserve a chance. Mark, where do you live now? None of your business. Our children can choose who they spend special days with." She fell silent, knowing her words wouldn't change my mind. "Just sign the papers and move on," Jennifer urged. "He's moved on. We love each other and are starting a new life together. I comforted him when he needed it most. He's mine, heart and soul. I didn't mean to, she said tearfully. I still love you. Well, Mark replied coldly, that's not my concern anymore. We're going nowhere, her lawyer interjected. Just sign and end this. He's moving on. Your marriage is over. Sign and move on. He placed the papers in front of her, and she signed, tears in her eyes. Do I need to stay? I asked my attorney. No, you're free to go. You'll get the decree by mail. Then we're done, I said, rising with Jennifer and leaving the room. I'm sorry, Mark, she said. I'll always love you. Well, the apology meant little now. Those last 3 words still lingered. Yet the woman holding my hand was the one I loved, soon to be my bride in just over a month. Outside, my father, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte awaited us at the cafe. Motioning with my head, we headed to the nearest pub. After buying a drink for each of us, we sat down, and I briefed them on the conversation. As I spoke, they perked up, realizing it was mostly me doing the talking. What did she look like? Charlotte asked. Pretty rough, definitely showing her age, Jennifer murmured in my ear. Did she sign the papers? My father inquired. Nodding, we raised our glasses and took sips. I went through something similar with your mother. I'm sure Kylie said what she needed to, just like your mother did with me. She wasn't blaming me, son. Mom was nagging you about working too hard, Stephen noted. Did she try to justify it? He asked. Yeah, the usual excuse, it was just lovemaking, I replied. What with these women claiming it was only lovemaking, Charlotte mused almost to herself. I'm committed to my husband. If I want something, I turn to him, Naomi stated, blushing as she realized her audience included her father and grandfather. We shared a laugh. Well said, girl, those are words to live by, my father praised. And if he needs a little help, he knows what to do, Naomi added. Naomi, that's my grandfather, Charlotte exclaimed. He's not dead, and neither am I. I'm 65 and still capable, Naomi retorted. Your grandfather and I promised to be faithful after our failed marriages, my father shared. I'm just relieved it's almost over, I admitted. Infidelity is unforgivable. If you were younger, maybe I'd feel trapped, Naomi reflected, glancing at my dad. But he always supported me. We stayed in Sydney a few more days, discussing plans with family. Charlotte and Tom agreed to come to Adelaide while Stephen was still deciding but likely to join us. Surprisingly, my sister offered to join us for dinner, arriving alone with news of her own broken marriage. You can stay with us while you work things out, Jennifer offered warmly. You're family now, and my family is yours too. We're selling the house here and moving to Adelaide, I chimed in. Housing prices are more reasonable there. We'll buy a big house with room for our growing family, Jennifer added, placing my hand on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child soon. How many kids do you want, Mark? She asked. As many as you want, Jenny. I love being a dad. A month later, I received the divorce decree, marking the official end of my marriage to Kylie Daniels. I never heard from her again, but word had it she left Sydney within 6 months of our divorce. According to Stephen, who was her sole point of contact, she relocated to Queensland to make a fresh start. After that, I stopped inquiring, and Stephen ceased updating me as I no longer had any interest in her whereabouts. Just 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach, surrounded by our families. She could hardly speak before I slid the engagement ring onto her finger. 6 months later, we tied the knot on the same beach just a short distance from our new home. As she approached me in her wedding attire, her pregnancy was unmistakable, yet my soon-to-be wife radiated happiness as her father escorted her toward me, offering her hand. Our smiles were uncontainable as we faced the celebrant. My dear ones, we are gathered here today. Update, I'm nearing retirement, and life couldn't be sweeter. Jennifer and I have been happily married for nearly 2 decades, cherishing every moment from our first date to our wedding day. 6 months after our return to Adelaide, both my daughter and son relocated here. My daughter is happily married with 3 grandchildren, while my son and his husband have adopted 2 children. A year post-divorce, my father and Naomi moved in with us in Adelaide, where my father peacefully passed away after nearly a decade. To support Naomi, we provided her a spacious granny apartment, ensuring her independence. My sister swiftly moved in with us after her own marital woes, bringing along her children. With our help, she found stability and eventually remarried, enjoying 15 years of wedded bliss. My brother remained in Sydney and maintained a relationship with our estranged mother. At 60, we learned of her passing. Despite our distant connection, Jennifer suggested we attend her funeral, embodying our commitment to being compassionate individuals. Surprisingly, she had remarried and embraced her husband's children as her own. While they weren't unaware of our existence, They were taken aback by her reluctance to acknowledge her estrangement from two of her children. We refrained from explaining the reasons behind our estrangement, as funerals aren't the appropriate time. We simply paid our respects before returning home, with no remaining relatives in Sydney. Within a year, my brother relocated to Adelaide to join us. Jennifer and I expanded our family, welcoming 2 boys and 2 girls. Despite our older children's excitement about having siblings and their willingness to babysit, Jennifer and I rarely ventured out. Nevertheless, our love remained strong, our bond unbroken, and we never went to bed angry. Our lives are just as vibrant now as they were when we first came together. Reflecting on my past, especially during my divorce, some may have preferred if I had reconciled with my ex-wife. However, what would have been the point? Leaving without a word hurt her more deeply. I remained silent for a year until I returned to ensure the divorce was finalized. Fidelity was a cornerstone of our marriage, and she breached that trust. While some advocate for reconciliation, I don't believe trust can be fully restored after infidelity. Suspicion and resentment linger, often leading to eventual divorce. Instead, I chose an unconventional path. There was no desire for revenge, nor was there any hope for reconciliation. I simply moved on without Kylie, finding my true soulmate in Jennifer. I still believe our meeting in the supermarket was fateful. Though not religious, I'm reminded of old-world religions that speak of gods of fate. Are you ready, Mark? My wife, stunning in a red ball gown, interrupted my thoughts. You still have that old charm. Any news on the children? They're either on their way or getting ready to leave. And the younger ones? They'll manage fine without us for the evening unless they set the place on fire, so we have time to ourselves. Absolutely. I love you, husband. I love you, wife. Here's to many more years of happiness. I hope so. I'll let the kids know we won't be staying long. They'll understand why.
It's been a dozen long years since my world was emotionally turned upside down. Reflecting on it now, I see how much my tone and attitude have changed over that time. I recall the days when my partner and I enjoyed a nearly flawless marriage. We met in college, fell deeply in love, and soon after graduating, we tied the knot. I was a jock, playing football and baseball, while she was stunningly beautiful and incredibly intelligent. Together, we did everything, socializing, pursuing hobbies, and weathering storms as a united front. Life, however, is never without its challenges. We supported each other through family tragedies and health scares, including her battle with cancer and my heart condition. We truly were partners in every sense of the word, and our love for each other continued to flourish. As our careers advanced, we upgraded our homes within the same school district and indulged in a lake house, creating countless cherished memories with our children. Despite our busy lives, we never neglected planning for the future, saving for our children's education and achieving debt-free status in the final years of our marriage. As a family, we were always on the move: vacations, camping trips, date nights, bowling with friends, staying busy and engaged. Amidst the chaos of daily life, we never lost sight of our love. We made a conscious effort to nurture our relationship, and that commitment yielded countless rewards. Certainly, no relationship is flawless, and we had our share of disagreements. Yet, we consistently approached those moments with love and respect, steering clear of anger or shouting. We functioned as a team in the truest sense, and our partnership brought us endless joy and fulfillment. Reflecting on it now, I realize our happiness was built on a foundation of hard work, dedication, and commitment. I'm certain my wife would have agreed. Our love was robust and only strengthened with each passing day. Our children, a son and a daughter separated by 2 years, illuminate our lives with their radiance. Their presence has brought immeasurable happiness and affection. As they matured and formed their own families, our contentment expanded even further. Our son showcased an innate athleticism akin to his father's, which his coaches and I guided onto the right path, ultimately earning him a baseball scholarship. Our daughter, on the other hand, excelled as a choir member and cheerleader. Despite her youth, she displayed remarkable maturity and composure, filling us with pride at every turn. As a father, my daughter's special bond with me was a treasure. She was always known as Daddy's girl. However, when she entered her teenage years, our relationship began to falter. She distanced herself from me, and I couldn't seem to connect with her, no matter how hard I tried. It was a painful period, but I knew she still loved me deep down. Fortunately, this arduous phase didn't last forever. Our relationship gradually mended, and we once again became close. I will never forget the immense pride I felt as she approached the culmination of her high school journey. Our union was a fairy tale come to life. I exhausted every strategy in my arsenal, from lavishing her with endearments and attention to attempting novel undertakings as a team. I went to extreme lengths to enhance my physical appearance, hopeful that it would reignite her ardor for me. However, it felt like grasping at smoke. The more I tried, the more elusive the solution appeared. My spouse became increasingly distant, and a sense of foreboding enveloped me. When she expressed her desire for a divorce, my world crumbled. How could this be happening? What had gone wrong? The shock and perplexity were insurmountable, not only for me but for our children as well. I could sense the pain and confusion in my own words, as if it was seeping through the screen. Losing someone so important, so integral to my life, was a pain that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of what was happening to my marriage, was evident in every sentence I uttered. One night, I sat down with my wife and asked her if everything was okay. At first, she brushed off my concerns, telling me that she was just tired from work and that it was nothing to worry about. However, I knew my wife better than that and persisted until she finally broke down and told me the truth. She had been feeling disconnected from me for some time, and she wasn't sure if she was happy in our marriage anymore. I was stunned. I had no idea that my wife had been feeling this way. I asked her what I could do to make things better, but she didn't know. She just knew that something had to change. Over the next few weeks, I worked hard to reignite the spark in our relationship. I planned romantic dates, surprised her with small gestures of kindness, and made an effort to listen to her when she spoke. Slowly but surely, my wife began to respond to my efforts. We started laughing together again, sharing our hopes and dreams, and working through our problems as a team. I had tried everything I could think of to save it, but nothing seemed to be working. The desperation in my voice was palpable, my heart breaking with every passing moment. I knew I had to do something, but I was powerless to stop the inevitable. The inability to ask my wife if she still loved me highlighted the vast emotional distance between us. The notion of someone else causing our separation only struck me during a coffee meeting with her best friend, and even then, I clung to denial. Symptoms like loss of appetite, trouble sleeping, and constant crying portrayed a man witnessing his world crumble, helpless to halt it. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of despair, unable to see a way out. The image of me lying on the floor, gazing at the ceiling for hours, with my dog's head on my chest, was both heartbreaking and heartwarming. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, someone or something could offer comfort and solace. My beloved pet sensed my pain and provided a sense of peace and support. It was evident I loved my wife deeply and would have done anything to save our marriage. Feeling helpless and out of control testified to how much I cared. It unfolded as a tragic tale of lost love, a fractured marriage, and a man left to pick up the pieces of his shattered heart. Recounting my story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empathy and compassion for myself for the pain and loss endured. Losing my beloved wife felt like an unceasing wave of torment crashing over me. Each day became a battle to rise without her at my side, rendering the love, time, and effort we devoted to each other seemingly futile. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't reconnect with her or mend our bond. Divorce, an inevitable and bitter reality, I was unwilling to confront. The prospect of losing her entirely, even as a friend, was devastating. Feeling inadequate as a spouse, unable to meet her needs, and incapable of preserving our marriage, the pain persisted. Yet, in spite of the pain, we remained amicable and respectful throughout, resolved to avoid inflicting more hurt. Dividing our possessions was a bittersweet experience. Together, we had toiled diligently to create a life we could both take pride in, and now it was being partitioned and sold. The memories formed in those two residences would forever be a part of me, but the idea of returning without her was intolerable. The finality of signing the divorce papers was gut-wrenching. I could see the tears in her eyes, and I knew she was hurting just as much as I was. It felt like a final goodbye, as if a piece of my heart was being ripped out. The pain of losing a long-term partner is enduring, leaving a scar that time may soften but will always remain. Amid the hurt and heartbreak, I hold on to the good times we shared and the love we once had for each other, finding some comfort. The bittersweet reality of watching your daughter grow up and get married is a feeling no parent can escape. As I sat there, surrounded by the people I love, a sense of melancholy crept up on me. My daughter, my little girl, was getting married and starting a new chapter in her life. It was a joyous occasion, of course, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness deep within my heart. Then, a magical occurrence unfolded. My daughter took a seat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, and we engaged in conversation, laughter, and reminiscence about old times. It was a beautiful moment, one I knew I'd treasure forever. As we sipped our scotch, gazing into the flickering flames of the fireplace, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. I felt thankful for my daughter and her fiancé, for my family and friends, and for the love surrounding me. Despite the ongoing healing from my divorce, I recognized the need to keep moving forward and find happiness wherever I could. But in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the love of my family, I felt content. I knew that everything was going to be all right, and that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would always have the support and love of those closest to me. Approaching the end of our conversation, my daughter and I began to delve into more serious topics, and that's when she brought up the divorce. It was something we hadn't really discussed in depth before, other than addressing logistics. However, this time we delved into the emotional aspects of it. I asked my daughter, now a grown woman, what it was genuinely like to live with me, and acknowledged that I knew I wasn't a perfect parent. It was a risky question, but one I felt compelled to ask after the divorce. To my surprise, my daughter opened up and shared that at times I could be intense and had high expectations. She admitted they all worried about disappointing me, but she also added that she knew I loved and protected them and would always be there. In fact, she even giggled as she shared that they used to affectionately refer to me as Sergeant Dad or the Sergeant. I acknowledged that I wasn't always the most emotionally open person, but reassured her that I cared deeply for them, even if not always overtly expressed. It was then that she shared something that left me stunned. She hoped her new husband would be as good a husband and father as I am, and wished that I could find someone who made me happy and didn't cheat like Mom. That's when it hit me. My daughter thought I knew about my wife's infidelity all along. She disclosed knowing about my ex-wife's cheating before our divorce and assumed that I had been aware all along. I was in disbelief and asked her why she hadn't told me before. She explained, presuming I knew more than she did, and that's why I had divorced Mom. She also shared that it was a really difficult time for her, and she had purposely avoided the topic with me, other than making sure I was okay. I hugged her tightly and thanked her for standing by me throughout everything. She would always be my little girl. I asked her when it had happened and how long it had been going on for. She didn't know for sure, but guessed that it started a month or so before Mom first mentioned divorce. I also asked if her brother knew, and she confirmed that he did. In fact, he was the one who did some social media research and suspected there might be someone else. I was amazed at how perceptive my kids were. It all started to make sense why my children were so cold to their mother and so sympathetic to me during all of this. I hugged my daughter tight, grateful for her honesty and her love. She was the only thing that made sense in my life right now. As I held her close, I knew that I needed to be strong for her and for my son. They were the only reasons I had left to keep going. My ex-wife's betrayal wrought profound changes. It altered how I perceived her, myself, and the world. It felt as if a part of me had perished, leaving me clueless about recovery. All I knew was the necessity to persist, to keep moving forward, even if only one step at a time. The night her affair was exposed marked a pivotal moment. Until then, I strived for civility during our divorce proceedings, but now uncertainty clouded my actions. Racing thoughts deprived me of sleep that night. Reflecting, I noticed her enhanced self-care, more frequent hair and nail treatments, purchasing nicer clothes, and dedicating more time to her makeup. Initially, I assumed it was an effort to keep pace with younger colleagues at work, only now realizing it likely signaled preparation for her affair. The truth surfaced. My ex-wife had already found someone else, another man. The rejection was already challenging, but this betrayal cut much deeper, shattering my world once again. My daughter showed me the other man's Facebook page and other sites. I discovered he was an executive at one of my ex's larger accounts. Though his posts didn't mention my ex by name, they strongly suggested an infatuation with someone sounding exactly like her. Despite my daughter's comment about him not being as good-looking as me, seeing my ex-wife with someone else was painful. I immediately severed all communication with my ex-wife, ignoring texts and calls, even avoiding contact with her friends. The fact that her best friend never followed up made me wonder if she had been aware of the affair all along. But one night, overwhelmed with anger and hurt, I broke into my ex-wife's house, determined to destroy everything in sight. I smashed her belongings, poured bleach on her clothes, and defaced her family photos. I wanted her to feel the pain and betrayal I had experienced upon discovering her infidelity. Amid my destructive rampage, my ex-wife suddenly appeared. Expecting outrage and authorities to be called, I was surprised when she looked at me with a mix of sadness and pity. Her response shocked me. Anticipating anger and bitterness, she instead showed compassion and understanding. She asked for my forgiveness, confessing that she had cheated on me and was too ashamed to tell me during the divorce. At that moment, my anger dissipated. I realized my ex-wife had been suffering as well, and my actions had only caused more pain. A week later, my daughter got married, and both my ex and I attended. Still feeling angry and hurt, I tried to focus on my daughter's special day. Despite losing over 20 pounds due to stress and increased workouts, I felt good in my tailored tux as I walked her down the aisle. During the ceremony, my ex looked stunning, wearing everything she knew I liked. Despite this, I didn't say a word to her. Still angry about her deception, I pulled away when she tried to hold my hand during the vows. I also ensured that our thighs and shoulders didn't touch. During the picture session, I didn't engage with my ex, focusing on joking with my daughter and everyone else. When we got to the reception, I was relieved to find prearranged seating, so I sat next to my daughter. My ex was seated a few chairs down, which must have been difficult for her. At that point, I don't think she realized I knew about her affair. I made no mention of my ex in my heartfelt father of the bride toast, treating it as if she played no role in raising our daughter. During the father-bride dance, despite her tears, I intentionally avoided looking in her direction. Although we were supposed to dance with both sets of parents, I chose to skip it entirely. The rest of the evening was spent joyfully with my daughter, son, and new son-in-law, successfully sidestepping my ex. I didn't witness her departure, so I'm uncertain how long she stayed, but she appeared melancholy every time I saw her. Though a challenging experience, it taught me much about myself and my ability to navigate tough situations. While it might not have been my proudest moment, I believe I did what was necessary to safeguard my emotional well-being. It was a bitter pill to swallow when, after over 28 years together, she opted for someone else during a difficult period in my life. However, I've made significant strides since then. As my counselor foresaw, I had to adapt to living alone and rediscover my purpose. Despite the initial difficulty, I can genuinely say the pain has dissipated. Instead, I dedicated myself to crafting a space that truly reflects me. I transformed my house into a dream haven, adding a third bay in the garage for my Harley Softail with a deuce seat and an ATV. Riding has always been a passion, but my ex prohibited me from having a motorcycle. Now, I enjoy the freedom to ride whenever I please. I upgraded my kitchen and living areas with the latest amenities. Yet, my favorite part remains the man cave in the basement. With a top-of-the-line sound system, video facilities, wet bar, and quality gym, it provides everything I need to unwind. Sitting in my recliner, listening to classical or old rock music, something my ex never allowed me to play loudly, is a true pleasure. My house has become the go-to spot for game days, where friends and family gather to watch multiple games simultaneously, akin to a sports bar. I even set up a playroom for my grandkids, furnished with a TV and toys. I cherish the moments spent with my grandkids and their parents when they visit regularly. Just last week, we had a delightful pumpkin carving party. My ex would have enjoyed it. I'm contemplating getting another dog for companionship, especially with the grandkids around. Additionally, I installed a remote wood-burning furnace with a heat exchanger, efficiently heating my home mostly from my own timber. It's not only cost-effective, but also keeps me active during colder months. In conclusion, despite the painful past, I'm thankful for the chance to rebuild my life and create a home I adore. I've discovered new passions, enjoyed time with loved ones, and forged memories that will endure. It's been 12 years since my ex-wife left me for another man, and I've accepted that she chose him over our 28 years together. Initially painful, as my counselor predicted, I learned to live alone and redefine my life's purpose. I turned my house into a dream haven, adding a third garage bay for my new Harley Softail and ATV. The kitchen and living areas received modern upgrades, and the basement became my sanctuary, a man cave with top-notch entertainment, a wet bar, and a gym. I also created a special playroom for my grandkids, furnished with a TV and toys. Hosting events like our recent pumpkin carving party has become a joy, and I'm even considering getting another dog for companionship. Regarding my romantic life, I've discovered the enjoyment of being single and re-entering the dating scene. Initially, my friends' partners attempted to set me up with other women, but I resisted. However, almost 2 years later, I yielded to a double date, urged by my kids. It was initially awkward, but now I have ongoing relationships with several remarkable women. Dating in my 50s and early 60s differs from my youth. There are numerous smart, attractive, unattached women, my age and younger, seeking attention from a relatively healthy man. You don't need to be a superstar. Being respectful, attentive, confident, and most importantly, fun is crucial. I'm entirely honest about not wanting a wife or an exclusive relationship. I exercise caution and am highly selective, avoiding married women or seeking only one-night stands. I must genuinely like her, have fun, enjoy her company, and sense the same reciprocation. I take them to concerts, ball games, camping, backyard cookouts, dinner theaters, and other activities before getting too close. Adjusting to the idea of non-exclusivity and not succumbing to jealousy or possessiveness took time. I realized I can't control my partner, and that's okay. It's part of the arrangement. I enjoy dating without the pressure of exclusivity, refreshing for both me and my lady friends. If something more closeness happens naturally, that's great, but I don't pressure or seduce them into it. I have a couple of longtime lady friends with whom I've never been close, and that's okay too. Overall, I'm living my best life, grateful for the experiences and people within it. Being a private pilot for many years, I relish flying my own small, experimental amateur-built plane. Unfortunately, my wife never shared my passion. To address this, I've invited each of my lady friends to fly-ins and short trips. I even take them on breakfast or lunch trips on my Harley, a popular outing known as the $100 hamburger. Each of these special women has her own passions, and I've tried to share in those as well. I've climbed Mount Baker after months of training, earned my PADI open water dive certificate, and even gone skydiving in tandem with them. Surprisingly, I enjoyed attending the opera with one of them. However, my most memorable experience involved crashing wedding parties at city parks, mingling with guests, enjoying their offerings, contributing to collections, and throwing $100 in the collection jar or money tree. Although I spend a lot of time with these women, more often than not, I'm home alone or cuddling with one while watching Netflix or listening to her favorite music. The point is, these women push me to do things I would never have done on my own. I still struggle with wanting these women exclusively, especially the wedding crasher, who is the whole package, but I know I cannot allow myself to think that way. Shortly before COVID, I went on a 7-day cruise with 3 attractive women. I had only dated and been close with one before the trip, but all 3 were fun and flirty. We laughed and had the best time going on day excursions and dancing and partying on the ship every night. It was probably the best vacation of my life, except for some memorable trips with our preteen kids. At the end of the cruise, a cruise line representative approached me and asked if I would like to go on future cruises at unbelievable discounts. Apparently, they needed more older single men to dance and interact with all the single ladies and widows. As flattering as it was, I couldn't help but feel like a gigolo. Though I'm living my best life, I acknowledge that my ex-wife may not be as fortunate. I've heard that her relationship with the other man endured for about 3 years. Nevertheless, I didn't delve into the specifics or inquire if they lived together. It's no longer my concern. I started responding to her texts and emails around 5 years ago to accommodate my kids, but our communication mostly revolves around sharing information and pictures about the kids and grandkids. My ex-wife expresses a desire to discuss the divorce and the affair, answering any questions I may have. However, I lack the inclination to delve into those details. I see no benefit, so I simply disregard those particular emails. We've encountered each other at weddings and funerals, exchanging polite greetings. The last in-person conversation occurred at our newest grandson's christening. She still looked attractive, but older, as we all do. We spent over 2 hours discussing the grandkids and reminiscing about fond memories. Though I occasionally mourn the loss of my marriage, these are undeniably the golden years. The duration of this phase remains uncertain, but my ex-wife and I have recently committed to supporting each other as we age. She is the mother of my children and the grandmother of my grandchildren, and we were married for 28 years. We've even signed HIPAA and medical directive forms for each other. While we are no longer a couple, my daughter has observed that I am more content and easygoing than before, a change I attribute to my retirement last year. The liberation from job pressures and office politics has significantly impacted my daily attitude. These are genuinely the golden years, and I'm grateful for this newfound freedom. Occasionally, I still lament the end of my marriage, especially when confronted with old photos or places that evoke memories of our shared past. Recently, my ex-wife has invited me to dinner at her condo or on a date, a topic my daughter has brought up several times. Interestingly, my ex isn't involved with anyone and hasn't been for years, raising questions about the purpose behind their sudden interest in my social life. While intrigued, I approach the situation cautiously. I'm uncertain if there's a collective effort against me, but I trust my daughter's intentions, knowing she would never allow me to be hurt again. In any case, I am content with my current life, whether single or in a relationship. I cherished my married life with my wife, and now appreciate the freedom of my single life. Whatever unfolds, life continues, and I'm assured that I will not be alone in my old age, regardless of whether I reunite with my ex.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
On a cold Friday evening in January, I was driving up to the cabin I inherited. I'd taken the week off to finish handling my mother's estate after her passing, following years of declining health. She didn't have much to leave behind aside from my grandfather's old hunting cabin, tucked away in northern Lower Michigan. Now, over 3 months later, I'd finally settled her outstanding bills and was heading to the cabin around 10 a.m., hoping for a break from the heavy days I'd had. The drive up turned into a snowy journey as heavy flakes started to fall, blanketing the road with about 4 inches by the time I reached the turnoff. But as I pulled up to the property, I noticed something strange. The gate was open, the chains lock cut. Fresh tire tracks led into the property, yet none came out. My first thought was that it must be some local thieves taking advantage of the empty cabin. I checked my phone. Surprisingly, I actually had service. I dialed 911, and the dispatcher assured me that she'd send a couple of units right away. She advised me to wait for them, suggesting that I block the gate with my car and find a safe spot. So, I pulled in, shut off the engine, and waited, thinking about how few people even knew this cabin existed. The area was mostly federal forest, deep wilderness, and not hunting season. Plus, animals like foxes, beavers, and coyotes had been trapped out decades ago. Before I could get too lost in thought, the flashing lights of the county sheriff's cars came into view down the road. I moved my car to let them through, and the deputies pulled up beside me, confirming that I was the one who'd called. I explained how I'd come upon the open gate, the cut lock, and the fresh tire tracks leading into the property. I mentioned that whoever had broken in must still be there since there was no other way in or out. The 2 sheriff's cars crept down the 500 yards to the cabin, with me following close behind. Sure enough, a car was parked beside the cabin, and whoever was inside seemed oblivious to our arrival. The deputies called in their update, noting that the cabin door showed signs of forced entry. Then, just as they finished the call, a man and a woman stepped out of the cabin, struggling to carry a gun safe between them. When the deputies confronted them, the man put on a bold front, insisting they had every right to be there because the property belonged to the woman. They hadn't noticed me until I walked up, and the moment they saw me, all the confidence drained from their faces. I couldn't believe it. The intruders were none other than my former business partner and my ex-wife. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Alexander, or Alex for short burns. I'm 36, divorced, and I own and work as a service technician for a bank equipment company. My job mostly involves installing and repairing equipment like drive-through systems used in local banks and credit unions. I'm also one of the business owners. No kids of my own, but my ex-wife has a young son. And that's part of how this story unfolds. I first met Cynthia Moore on a flight back from Chicago. I was returning home from my time in the Army at the age of 25, having served 6 years as a radio repairman. During my time in service, I'd earned a degree online in electronics with a minor in computer security. I'd done 2 tours in the Middle East and was more than ready to leave the Army behind. Cynthia happened to be in the seat beside me on that flight, and we struck up a conversation. I learned that she was the youngest in her family, on her way back to Grand Rapids from a shopping trip in Chicago. We hit it off, and even as I was retrieving my duffel and barracks bags from the luggage carousel, we kept talking. Cynthia asked if her driver could drop me somewhere, but before I could answer, my mom arrived. After introductions and a quick exchange of numbers, I left with my mom, figuring it was a pleasant encounter but likely over. I hadn't planned on calling her, and honestly, I didn't think she'd ever call me either. About 10 days later, I was at my mother's house when the phone rang. She handed it to me, saying it was for me. I was curious, as I hadn't reconnected with anyone from my high school days yet. To my surprise, it was Cynthia on the line. Right away, she started in on me, complaining about how I hadn't called her. Before she could get too deep into her rant, I cut her off, saying, "I didn't call you. And if you're going to be rude about it, this conversation is over. Goodbye." Then, I hung up, thinking that would be the end of it. Later that week, I went out with a few high school buddies to a bar downtown. While grabbing drinks, I noticed a commotion in one corner of the room. I turned to see 2 guys cornering a young woman who was clearly trying to get away. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, and the bouncers just stood there, not doing a thing. Being the good guy I'd always been, I signaled to my friends, walked over, and tapped the bigger of the 2 guys on the shoulder. I asked, "Are you always a bullying a-hole, or is tonight just a special occasion? If it's always, we'll find a reason for you to stop, or you can leave. If it's just tonight, walk away and cool off." He looked at me like I'd grown a third eye and sneered, "Listen here, you little prick. After we're done with this woman, I'm going to pound you so far into the ground, you'll need a week to dig yourself out." The big guy glanced over his shoulder, noticing my 4 friends standing behind me, and his confidence visibly wavered. He gulped, muttering to his buddy, "Let's get out of here. This jerk's ruined all the fun anyway." Then, he turned back to the girl and sneered, "Listen, if you're not going to play, don't take drinks from guys." Before he could leave, I grabbed his arm and pressed down hard on his elbow joint, hitting the nerve right where it would affect his hand. I leaned in close and said quietly, "How about you apologize to the lady? If you do, maybe you'll get some feeling back in that hand. Otherwise, I'll squeeze harder, and you won't be able to pick up a pencil for a month." He swallowed hard and mumbled to the girl, "I apologize. Guess I had too much to drink." With that, he and his friend quickly left. I turned to check on the girl, and, to my surprise, she snapped, "A hole. Mind your own business." I could have handled it. I realized it was Cynthia, and I couldn't help but laugh. When I finally caught my breath, I replied, "I see your manners haven't improved. Do us both a favor and lose my mother's phone number. I won't be coming around anymore. Maybe after charm school, you'll figure out how not to piss people off." Then, I turned to my friends and said, "I'm heading out, guys. The company over here is a little too toxic for my taste. See you later." I drove back to my mother's house, still fuming. After a restless night, I walked into the kitchen the next morning, and there was Cynthia, sitting at the table chatting with my mother. I immediately turned around, went back to my room, threw on some outdoor clothes, and walked out the front door to cool off. After an hour, I returned to find the house empty, but there was a note on the kitchen table from my mother, asking me to call her. I dialed her up, and she immediately started lecturing me about my so-called lack of manners. Fed up, I cut her off and said, "I'll pack my things and stay in a hotel until I can find my own place. Don't tell anyone where I go. I'll call you once I've settled and have a new car. Then maybe you can apologize for getting involved where you're not wanted." I was beyond angry. This was the kind of rage that could make you want to throw out the whole situation, baby and bathwater included. As I packed, the phone kept ringing, but I ignored it. When I was ready, I called a cab and checked into a Holiday Inn on the other side of town. After settling in, I phoned a couple of friends and got the name of a car salesman they recommended as fair and honest. Thanks to my time in the Army and the lack of spending options in the Iraqi desert, I had most of my pay saved up. I called the car salesman my friends had recommended and learned he worked at a nearby Ford dealership. I gave him an idea of what I wanted, and he mentioned they had a couple of Explorers and Escapes that might fit the bill. Since the dealership was close, I walked over to check them out. He showed me a 2-year-old Explorer with the Eddie Bauer package and a 3-year-old Basic Explorer. The Escapes on the lot were a little too fancy for my taste, though I liked the size. Then he said, I have a companion dealership across town with a plain Jane Escape that might suit you. Only catch, it's a really bright yellow, and no one seems to want it. Want to go check it out? I'll drive so I don't have to split the commission. He chuckled, and we headed out in his car. The Escape was as simple as they come, but had all the essentials I wanted. The yellow was definitely loud, but it didn't bother me. I just needed reliable transportation with 4-wheel drive for Michigan winters. I haggled him down to a good price and left a deposit. Then I took the car to a friend's garage to have it checked out. He promised it would be ready by early afternoon, so I headed to a nearby diner to grab some lunch. When I finished lunch and returned to the shop, my friend gave me the thumbs up on the car's condition, but he recommended getting more aggressive tires for winter. I took the Escape back to the dealer, talked with the salesman, and he arranged for me to get a set of mud and snow tires, including the wheels, at a local tire store. Since I didn't have a permanent place yet, the tire shop offered to hold the tires for a week. After finalizing the deal and sorting out the temporary tags, I drove back to the hotel. With transportation sorted, all I needed was civilian clothes and a cell phone before I could start searching for a place to rent. A quick trip to Walmart the next morning got me some essentials and a track phone. Then, I picked up a newspaper and a local real estate guide from the hotel and went apartment hunting. I toured a few complexes and duplexes, but nothing felt quite right. While driving through some neighborhoods I'd always liked, I spotted a for rent sign on a house in a quiet area. I called the number on the sign and left a message. Just as I started to drive away, my phone rang. It was the landlord. He said he could meet me at the house in 5 minutes, as he lived just a few blocks away. I turned back to wait. When the landlord arrived, we exchanged introductions, and he mentioned that he was actually hoping to sell the house. It was fully furnished, which, according to his realtor, made it harder to sell. Buying a house hadn't been on my radar, but from the outside, it looked pristine. As we walked through the house and around the yard, I was impressed with the condition. The furniture wasn't exactly my style, but it was livable. When I asked about the rent, he quoted a rate that was much lower than anything I'd seen at the complexes or duplexes I'd toured. He added that the first year's rent could be applied as a down payment if I decided to buy. When I asked about the sale price, he named a figure I could afford and offered to include it in the lease agreement if I wanted the option to buy later. We shook hands, he gave me his lawyer's contact info, and I scheduled an appointment for the next morning. Back at the hotel, I called my mother's house and left a message with my new cell number. Still irritated by her meddling, I asked her to keep the number private and only to call in an emergency, or if she promised to stop interfering. It may sound harsh, but my mother was still trying to manage my life. A major reason I joined the military in the first place. At 25, a skilled veteran, I didn't need a babysitter or someone constantly offering unsolicited advice. I found a job with a local electronics company, and eventually, I bought the house I had been renting. My mother and I patched things up, and I learned that when Cynthia visited her, she actually wanted to apologize and thank me for stepping in to help her at the bar. I reached out to Cynthia, accepted her apologies, and then moved on. Then, during a service call for a local business where their security system's video recorder was malfunctioning, I had an unexpected encounter. The receptionist greeted me and called for the security director, and out came Cynthia, all business. She led me to the security setup and showed me the faulty recorder. After about 10 minutes, I realized someone had tried to fix a non-existent problem and had crossed a few cables. Cynthia was relieved that the issue was resolved and asked if I'd be open to meeting for lunch sometime. I agreed and found myself looking forward to it. After that lunch, we began dating and continued for about 6 months before I asked Cynthia to marry me. She agreed but explained that there were a few things that might complicate things. Her family not only owned the business where I'd seen her, but several others across the county. She also told me her father, whom she referred to as father, not dad, required her to have a prenuptial agreement before marriage. I told Cynthia that money wasn't important to me, and that if the prenuptial agreement was fair, I had no problem with it. She was curious about how I could dismiss money so easily. I explained that I was healthy, had a good-paying job, a house, a car, and all the things I needed to be comfortable. I asked her why it was so important to have more money than you really need, whether luxuries were so essential that acquiring them became the main goal. She admitted she wasn't sure, since she had always had money. While she wasn't as focused on status and luxury as her mother, she did enjoy the finer things in life. We agreed on an 8-month engagement. However, Cynthia's parents weren't supportive of our marriage. Her mother thought I was beneath them, and her father believed I was after their money. The tension came to a head during a Sunday dinner at their house. They invited a young man from one of their businesses, someone on their social level, and the three of them began making subtle snide remarks about my job. I endured it for about 20 minutes until the young man made a comment about my parents, suggesting they must not have been good if I had to join the army to get into college. That did it for me. I was furious, but I was smart enough not to let it show too much. I calmly addressed everyone at the table. If you think I'm not good enough for your daughter based on the conversation happening here, then I agree with you. That being said, I was raised to treat family like guests and guests like family. I turned to Cynthia and said, if you want to stay engaged to me, don't ever invite me back here again. I asked for my ring back, got it, and walked out. I never returned to their house. Cynthia later told me that the rest of the day was filled with shouting, and the guy from the business had said enough to get himself kicked out. She came over to my place afterward and said we could get married in Vegas if that's what it took. I gave her the ring back, and we shared a kiss, and more, later that night. Things settled down after that, and her father called me about the prenup. I told him to send me a copy of his proposal, and I would review it. If it was fair to both of us, I'd sign it. If I didn't understand something, I'd take it to a lawyer. If it wasn't fair, I would offer a counter-proposal. We could either accept one or the other, or find a compromise. I made it clear that I didn't care about their money and suggested that the best solution would be to put all of Cynthia's money into a trust before the wedding. Then I ran into another problem. Cynthia's father sent me a prenup that was ridiculously one-sided and would have left me in a terrible position if we ever divorced. I took it to a lawyer, who helped me draft two different versions. One was just as unfair to Cynthia as the one her father sent me. The other was a much more balanced agreement, protecting both Cynthia's family's assets and my own, mainly my house, business, tools, and savings. The fair prenup also stated that, except in cases of adultery or spousal abuse, any assets acquired during the marriage would be split equally between both parties. If the divorce was due to either adultery or abuse, the injured party would receive all assets acquired during the marriage. I sent back the prenup her father had given me with a note that said, "No way," and sent the one I had made with a note saying, "I will sign this one." I knew that would irritate him, so I waited for his response. When the call didn't come the next day, I was surprised. Then, I received my mail, and the prenup I had sent was returned, shredded into several pieces. I called Frank, Cynthia's father, and laughed, saying I hadn't thought to shred the one he had sent me. I then told him I had a compromise that was fair to both of us and suggested we meet with Cynthia and my lawyer the next day. He came as lawyer. We met, and they requested alimony, which I firmly declined. They also wanted to remove the adultery and abuse clauses, but I stood my ground and refused. They insisted on protecting Cynthia's assets, which I agreed to, but I made it clear that none of my assets from before the marriage could be touched. After much negotiation, we finally reached a compromise that reflected my original proposal. Cynthia and I signed the documents, and we returned to planning the wedding. I hoped this would be the end of the drama and that we could move forward and start our life together. Unfortunately, that was not the case. As I mentioned, I worked as a service technician and was occasionally sent out of town for customer issues. About 3 weeks before the wedding, I had to leave for a problem that was supposed to be a quick fix requiring only an overnight stay. I told Cynthia I'd be back the following evening. She agreed and said she would go to her parents' house the next day to do some last-minute planning with her mother. The issue at the customer site was a simple fix. They needed a line conditioner, which I had in my truck. I set it up and was finished in less than 25 minutes. I could make it back home before dark, so I stopped to buy Cynthia some flowers and drove to her apartment. When I arrived, I rang the bell, and she answered the door wearing a nightgown and robe with smudged lipstick. I handed her the flowers and asked if I could come in. She hesitated, and just then, a man, who was the same one from the dinner, came around the corner, dressed only in athletic shorts, and asked who I was. I became livid. I told the man that I was her fiancé and asked Cynthia what was going on. She said nothing. I took off her engagement ring and told her the wedding was off. I then informed the man that she had been unfaithful. Cynthia started crying, but I simply turned around and left. Later, I received a phone call from Frank, who asked what had happened to make Cynthia cry. I explained the situation, telling him that he and his wife got their wish. I realized she wasn't the right person for me, and the wedding was off. Frank replied that this was not what Cynthia had said. I told him that I understood he had to protect his family, but I would not marry someone who had betrayed me. I suggested he ask Cynthia about the man who was nearly naked in her apartment while I was supposed to be out of town. Frank claimed that wasn't what Cynthia had told him. I asked him why she was spending time with another man in her apartment when we were supposed to be married in just 3 weeks. He said Cynthia had described him as a friend from college. I laughed and asked if he was just a friend, then why was he not dressed when he came to speak to me? Frank apologized and said he would get to the bottom of the situation. I told him to do what he needed to do, but I made it clear that I would not be marrying Cynthia under any circumstances. I ended the conversation there. Cynthia called multiple times, but I ignored them, sending each one to voicemail and deleting them without listening. I then called my mother, telling her to stay out of it, as this was something between Cynthia and me. She said that if Cynthia called her, she would talk to her, but she wouldn't interfere further. I reassured her that, despite everything, I still loved her. We ended the conversation, and I went to bed. The next day, when I came home from work, Cynthia was sitting on the steps of my house. She said we needed to talk. I replied, "No, we don't. You've shown me exactly how important I am to you. We were engaged, and I found you spending time with another man less than a month before we were supposed to get married. We won't be getting married, we won't be dating, and we won't even be talking after today. If you don't leave right now, I'll sell this house and move. Then, I'll make sure no one we both know will ever know where I am. I can't stand a liar and a cheat. Too bad I ruined your little affair yesterday. Did it continue after I left? Was your other lover as good as I used to be? Was it worth throwing all of your parents' plans away?" She started crying again, but I simply walked around her and went in through the back door, since she was blocking the front. She rang the doorbell for about 5 minutes before eventually leaving. I didn't hear from her for several days, but then I received a surprising call from her mother, asking me to reconsider. I explained what had happened and told her to ask Cynthia and get the truth directly from her. I repeated that the wedding was not going to happen. I added, "I'm sorry, but you must have been right." When she asked, "Right about what?" I replied, "I'm obviously not good enough for your daughter." She showed me that by what she did. And just think, if she's pregnant, it's not mine. I heard a sharp gasp, and then the phone line went silent as she hung up. A week passed, and then I was called into the office. My boss and the company owner informed me that they had an offer to sell the company for an amount that seemed too good to be true. I said, "Let me finish this meeting. Mr. Moore wants the company, but I have to leave, right?" George, the owner, confirmed that Mr. Moore was indeed interested, but he added, "No, he doesn't insist that you be fired. He actually asked me to ask you if you would work for him." I told George that I didn't think so, and that I'd write up my resignation letter as soon as I got back to my computer. I also expressed my frustration with Cynthia's family and their manipulative behavior. I explained that I had enough savings to get by for a few months, but I would be putting my house up for sale and leaving the city once it's sold. I also told George that I wouldn't be sharing my new location with him. George seemed to understand and assured me he'd write me a glowing recommendation. I thanked him, then went to my computer, typed the letter, and handed it to him. He gave me my final paycheck along with an additional one, which he said was a bonus for being a great employee. He advised me to use his home phone number as a reference since Mr. Moore would be taking over next week. I asked him not to tell the new owner about my resignation, letting him find out when he reviewed the payroll. In just 2 days, I found a new job, only 40 miles away. When my house sold, through an agent of Mr. Moore, I left and didn't look back for over 18 months. As my mother's health began to decline, I decided to move closer to Grand Rapids. I bought a spacious ranch-style home with 4 bedrooms and moved my mother in with me. We rented out her house, which helped cover some of her medical expenses. The tenant mentioned that a young woman had been trying to track down our new address. I made it clear to him that he should not share any information with her, and, if he felt uncomfortable with her behavior, he should contact her father using the number from my old workplace. My new job was similar to the one I had at George's company, but after a year, I realized there was no upward mobility. I had grown frustrated with the lack of opportunities for advancement in the company, so I began looking for something more promising. Eventually, I found an opportunity to invest in a company that was starting to make headway in the bank equipment sales and service industry. I was going to manage the service side, while my partner, Jason Connor, would handle sales. To my surprise, the bank agreed with my plan, and they provided me with a business loan to cover the remaining amount needed to purchase a 50% stake in the company. I worked hard in the field and, over time, found a couple of guys who were qualified and diligent. They were also very security conscious, so we decided to start offering services like combination changes and lock replacements. Business was going well, and on one of my calls, I ran into Cynthia, who was now working as a loan officer at a small bank her father had bought. The problem they had was a sticky safe lock. It only took me about 30 minutes to get the small safe open and another few minutes to install the new lock and set the combination. As we were talking, Cynthia admitted she had made a huge mistake and wanted to get back together. I asked her if she could prove she was trustworthy. She said she had learned her lesson and still loved me. I then asked if she had ever told her parents the truth, or if I was still the villain in the story. She hesitated and said, sort of. I stopped her and said, Cynthia, I haven't stopped loving you, but I will not be blamed for something that I wasn't at fault for, especially when you lied to your parents about it. Would you tell me the truth about that night? I have a couple of questions about what I saw. She nodded, and her expression was a mixture of fear and guilt. She then said, yes, I'll answer honestly, and I won't hide anything from you. Can we stop talking here at work? Would you meet me at the diner down the street after your shift? I agreed, and we set a time. When I arrived, she was already there. I ordered coffee and sat down in the back where she had gotten a booth. She gave me a small smile and tried to apologize once more, but I raised my hand to stop her. I said, are you ready to answer my questions? I need complete and honest answers. If I sense any hesitation, incompleteness, or dishonesty, I will leave, and I won't see you again, at work or outside of work. If you make me feel comfortable with your answers, we can start fresh. That means dating again, and maybe even an engagement someday. This is your only chance, so use it wisely. Shall I begin? She gave me a mixture of a scared and annoyed look, but finally said quietly, yes. I asked my first question. Was that the only time you cheated on me after we got engaged? She responded, no, but he was the only one, and it was just 2 other times. I followed up with, did you have sex with him either that night or the other 2 times? Her reply was simple. Yes. I asked the last question. Will you tell your parents the truth about that guy and how I caught you? She pleaded, I can't. Please don't make me choose between telling them and letting you go. I finished my coffee, laid a $5 bill on the table, and stood up. As I walked away, I said, you already made your choice. I told you I needed honesty, and you're still making me the bad guy. For the last time, goodbye. Wait, she called out, and for some reason, I stopped. I turned to face her, and she said sadly, I will tell them tonight. That's not good enough, I replied. I have your father's business phone number. I'll call him, and you will tell him now, using my phone and my dialing. Then, I'll call your parents' house, and when your mother picks up, you'll tell her too. Is that a deal? Okay, she said quietly. I dialed her father's business number, and when he answered, I introduced myself and told him that his daughter needed to speak with him. I handed her the phone, and she began explaining everything. She admitted to cheating on me, explaining that I had caught her because I returned early. She also said she wanted to clear the air and acknowledge that Nathan was not the bad guy. She told him she was sorry she had lied, but that she had been ashamed of getting caught. I took my phone back and started to leave, but before I did, I said loud enough for her to hear, I cannot accept that she is only ashamed that she got caught and not ashamed of the cheating itself. Your first impression was right, that I wasn't good enough for your daughter, because a vow is very important to me. I apologized for the way the conversation had unfolded, but explained that Cynthia had wanted to start over with dating, and I had insisted she tell him the truth. I hung up and left, but when I saw Cynthia's car following me, I drove to the local library. I entered through the front door, and as soon as I saw her get out of her car, I slipped out the back and drove home. The next day, when I arrived at the office, Cynthia was waiting for me. I told her, I've said all I'm going to say to you. If you don't leave me alone, I'll file a stalking complaint with the police. She left, and I didn't hear from her for a couple of weeks. Then, our company received a service call from her bank, and all of our techs were out on other jobs. I told Jason about the situation, so he called the manager. After he finished the call, he said, sorry, but it was a legitimate request. They have a carrier stuck in one of their drive-through tubes. I told Jason that I would take the call, but if I ran into any issues with Cynthia, I would sell my share of the company and leave. He looked at me and said, God, you're so stubborn. Have you ever done something stupid? I replied, of course I have. My problem is that not only did she do something stupid, dishonest, and disgraceful, but then she blamed me for the breakup. She had a chance to clear everything up last week, but all she admitted was that she was sorry she got caught. I paused and added, I learned before I was 10 years old that the punishment and embarrassment from making a mistake or doing something stupid doesn't last as long as being caught in a lie. I went and cleared the tube, and when I want to get the service ticket signed, the manager tried to send me to Cynthia to get her signature. I said, if you don't sign it, tell me someone besides Miss Moore. Otherwise, I'll go back to my office with an unsigned ticket and we'll bill your bank regardless. If you have an issue with that, we can invoke our 90-day cancellation clause, and you can find a different service company. If you need an explanation as to why I'm taking this stance, ask Miss Moore. I want no dealings with her, even on a professional level. She signed it and told me she would report me to the owner. I replied, "I'm the owner." She just shook her head and said, "I'll talk to Mr. Moore. We may invoke that 90-day clause. That will be my recommendation." I agreed to that and left, thinking, great, I've just cost the company business by being a jerk. When I got back to the office, I told Jason what happened, and he was furious. He said that if he could get the money, he would buy me out. I was just as pissed, so I gave him the contact at my bank. His mouth dropped open, and he quickly said, "I can't run this business by myself, and none of the techs are at a point where they can do your job. Let's just take you off the service call list, and you can just manage from here on out." I agreed to Jason's suggestion, took myself off the service roster, and went home. Later, I received a call from Frank, asking why I wouldn't deal with his daughter. After explaining everything to him, he said he would transfer her from the bank to one of his other businesses. I told him that wasn't necessary because I had already removed myself from the service roster and would no longer be calling on customers. I added that if he still felt something needed to be done, he could invoke the 90-day clause. He said he didn't want to do that, as all the other service groups had done a poor job in the past. I apologized for my behavior, acknowledging that it wasn't professional, but explained that his daughter had pushed me over the edge. I apologized again, wished him well, and ended the call. About 6 months later, I was having a steak with some friends at the local Outback when I saw Cynthia walk in with a group of people I recognized from the bank. She didn't notice me at first, but as she was being seated, our eyes met. She gave a small nod before turning her attention back to her group. She looked a little sad. As my group finished up and I got my check, I left the restaurant. When I got home, I saw I had a message on my home phone. It was from Frank, asking me to call Cynthia. He said, "She is so depressed, not eating or sleeping regularly." I called the last number I had for Cynthia, but there was no pickup, so I left a message with my cell phone number, asking her to call. I also made sure my caller ID function was blocked on my home phone, considering everything that had happened in the past. A couple of hours later, just as I was getting into bed, my phone rang. It was Frank, telling me that Cynthia had collapsed after leaving the restaurant and was taken to the hospital. One of the people in her group had called 911, and she had been admitted for a series of tests. I found myself in a difficult position. I still had feelings for her, but she had consistently blamed me for the breakup. I told Frank, "I'll think about it tonight, and if I decide not to see her, I'll call you. I can't make a decision right now." Despite my reservations, I ended up going to see her. Fortunately, her parents were there. Cynthia looked terrible, thin, with puffy eyes and a haunted expression. I greeted everyone and then asked Cynthia about the issues her father had mentioned. Her response was emotional. "Because I love you, and you dumped me. You've treated me terribly," she nearly shouted. I asked her parents if we could step out into the hall to talk, and they agreed. "I think it's best if I leave now," I said. "Cynthia is very upset, but I've made it clear that I will not tolerate being with someone who cheated." I continued, "The last time I called you, Frank, she was about to tell you the full story of the breakup. I was there, and the only thing she seemed ashamed of was getting caught. I still love her, but until she accepts responsibility for what she did, I cannot have any further contact with her. If this disappoints or upsets you both, I'm truly sorry, but I have to prioritize my own well-being. I hope that one day you will understand that I'm not a bad person, just an honest one. Goodbye." A couple of weeks later, Jason came to me and said Mr. Moore wanted to buy him out. I was taken aback and angry. Jason mentioned that I should have the right of first refusal. I asked him how much it would take for me to buy his share. After he gave me the number, I contacted the bank, and they agreed to hold the loan. I also told Jason to inform Mr. Moore that I was now the sole owner of the company. About 3 hours later, I received a call from Frank. He asked me why I had bought Jason's share. I explained that it was because I could no longer work with him, and if Mr. Moore had purchased Jason's share, he would have likely put Cynthia in the company in some capacity. I made it clear that I could not work with Cynthia. I then asked if Cynthia had changed or added anything to her version of our breakup. He said they hadn't asked. Frustrated, I responded, "Now that I'm the sole owner, I'm going to formally invoke the 90-day clause. The only other option is for you to buy me out." I then ended the call. I immediately called Jason to update him on the situation. I also offered to sell him his share back for the price I paid, minus 3%, if Frank did not buy me out within 72 hours. Frank responded, saying, "Okay, I finally understand that, one way or another, you won't have contact with Cynthia. I don't want to lose your company's excellent service. I will buy you out, but I want a non-compete agreement." I firmly replied, "No. If you buy me out, I will start a new company in 6 weeks. I'll give you my price, non-negotiable, and I will agree in the sales documents that I won't solicit business from any companies you own. I also won't attempt to poach any employees from your company, but if they come to me for a job, I will hire them. Frank's response was terse. All right, what's your price? I told Frank the amount it would take for him to buy me out. The price I quoted was a 25% premium over what I had paid Jason for his share, which was twice what Frank had paid me for the company. He agreed to the terms. Things continued smoothly for almost a year when I saw an article in the business section announcing that my former company was filing for bankruptcy. It turned out that my new company had taken all of their clients, except for Frank's bank. Frank called and offered to sell the company back to me for the amount of its accounts payable, which was about 30% of what he had paid me for it. I accepted the offer and agreed to honor the original contract with his bank. After everything settled, I became the sole shareholder in an LLC focused on bank equipment sales and service. I hired Jason as my vice president of sales. Both of us made money, and the business continued to grow. Unfortunately, my mother's health continued to decline, and I made arrangements to hire a live-in home care assistant through an agency. Somehow, Cynthia found out about this and called my mother to offer her services. Although I wasn't pleased with the situation, Cynthia had always gotten along well with my mother, so I caved. Cynthia, I must admit, was very good for my mother. Whenever there was a crisis, Cynthia would promptly contact the doctor, and as a result, my mother's outlook improved, and she became much happier. Over time, I found myself being drawn back to Cynthia. I realized that I had never stopped loving her, but I also knew that without being able to trust her again, there would be no possibility of rekindling our relationship. About 8 months into this arrangement, Cynthia asked for an additional night off, beyond her usual time off. She mentioned that she had a date and wanted the time to herself. I said, of course, I'm glad to see you moving on. If this happens again, just let me know, and I'll make arrangements if I'm unable to be here. The night she went out, I realized I was feeling jealous. I tried to suppress it, but I couldn't. After she left, I wandered around the house, unable to focus on anything, until my mother, noticing my behavior, laughed and said, I knew it. You still love that girl. When are you going to forgive her? I replied, I'll forgive her when she tells everyone that I wasn't the cause of our breakup, when I can trust her again, and when she is genuinely sorry for cheating, not just for getting caught, but only when she proves she deserves forgiveness. I told Cynthia that she could have a night off whenever she wanted, as long as she gave me 24 hours notice. She thanked me and assured me that she wouldn't take advantage of the privilege. For the next 3 weeks, Cynthia went out one night each week. One day, while I was out for lunch, I happened to run into one of her friends. I decided to ask if Cynthia had mentioned anything about the guy she was dating. The response I got was a laugh, followed by, she doesn't have any new boyfriends. She's just trying to make you jealous. She spends those nights out with me or one of her other friends and doesn't even talk to any guy. That revelation made me even more curious about her feelings. I realized that I still had strong feelings for her, and it prompted me to think about things for a few days. Eventually, I decided to explore where things might go if we tried dating again. About 2 weeks later, I sat down with Cynthia and asked her if she had come to terms with the truth behind our breakup. She said that she had. I then asked if she was ready to tell her parents the full story of what caused the breakup, to which she responded that she already had. I asked her if she would be open to starting over, restarting the relationship from scratch. I made it clear that there were some rules we both needed to follow. I emphasized again that we both needed to follow these rules for things to work between us. I laid out the rules clearly. No dates or sex with anyone else. Company functions must allow spousal attendance to ensure both parties can attend. Full honesty about money, plans, and any social events. A prenup that protects both my assets as well as hers. No marriage, or even plans for marriage, until I felt ready. Cynthia looked at me, stunned, and asked, What caused you to become so stubborn? I laughed lightly and replied, Oh, I don't know, maybe a lying, cheating fiancé. Can you think of a reason why that wouldn't upset me? Her expression turned sad as she said, Yeah, I guess I deserve that. I'm really sorry and sad that my actions made you change from how sweet and caring you were. I snapped back. We wouldn't even be having this conversation if I didn't care. I not only care, but I still have deep feelings for you. But that doesn't mean I'll forget the hurt. She seemed to understand, and after a moment of quiet reflection, she asked, Okay, so are we going to start dating again? We did, and within a year, we were engaged and married. Cynthia was a beautiful bride. Life was good. Work was thriving. Sales were up, and the money was rolling in. Once we got married, I hired a home healthcare company to assist with my mother's care. Cynthia complained about it, but I explained to her that while she had been the backup plan before, I needed her to take care of me as well. A couple of years into the marriage, things began to unravel. Jason decided to leave the company, and Cynthia began to distance herself emotionally. She started going out for girls' nights out, and our intimacy virtually disappeared. She began complaining about almost everything. According to her, I wasn't successful enough, I wasn't socially active enough, and I just wasn't enough, period. I'd had enough. I told her, either you get an attitude adjustment or you get out. Unsurprisingly, she didn't take it well. Cynthia broke down crying and slammed the bedroom door. Suddenly, it hit me. Cynthia had always wanted to wait to have kids, and I began to wonder if there was more to her behavior. I decided to investigate further. The next day, I went to the office and contacted the private investigation company we used for security checks on employees. John Chambers, the investigator assigned to the case, said he could do a preliminary check within a day or two, but a more thorough investigation would take a couple of weeks. I instructed him to proceed with the preliminary report and continue the full investigation until my questions were answered. John called me about a week and a half later with the news I had been expecting. Cynthia was cheating. She wasn't just involved with my former partner, Jason, but also with the man from the dinner, the one I had caught her with previously. John had obtained explicit pictures, videos, and audio recordings as evidence. He recommended I not watch or listen to the material, as it was very raw. Instead, he suggested I provide the DVD to my divorce attorney. I asked John to make 3 copies of the DVD. I wanted one for my attorney, one for Cynthia's father, and one to keep in my safe, as I didn't trust Cynthia's family or friends not to destroy the evidence. I also requested 5 notarized copies of his written report. I spoke with several divorced friends to find a reputable attorney, someone who would aggressively protect my assets. The firm of Wilson, Lopez, and Taylor came highly recommended, so I scheduled an appointment. I gathered all the relevant financial and legal documents for both myself and my business and met with Kathleen Wilson as scheduled. I provided her with my documents and the DVD, along with the prenup. She was impressed with how well prepared I was and assured me that if the documents supported what I had said, I would retain all my assets, and the accumulation of wealth during the marriage would be mine. She even mentioned that given her own wealth, she would likely have to pay me spousal maintenance, alimony. I instructed her to file for divorce and to seek a restraining order to prevent Cynthia from coming to my business, my home, or contacting me. I explained that Cynthia was often blind to her own faults and would likely attempt to retaliate. Additionally, I wanted to pursue legal action against both men involved, as well as against Moore's business, since Cynthia and the other man worked together there. Kathleen, who insisted on being called by her first name, said, "Alex, I'll take care of everything you've asked, and I'll also find a way to make sure she is forced to move out of your home and have no contact with you unless it's through a lawyer or an officer of the court. Do you know where she'll be, say, Wednesday or Thursday evening?" I responded, yes, according to the written report, she meets Jason on Wednesday afternoon, and on Thursdays, she has 4-hour lunches at A-Hole's house. They don't return until around 4:45 p.m. to finish their workday. I'd really prefer for her to be served at her father's business office. Thursday works for me. You're almost as vindictive as I am, she replied. Thursday came, and things were set into motion. Cynthia and her father were served, and my phone started ringing almost immediately. My secretary complained that I wasn't answering calls from either my wife or Mr. Moore. She mentioned that she wasn't hired to get involved in my personal issues. I asked her, "Do you like your job?" She replied, "Yes, but I didn't sign up for this." I, still holding firm to my stance, said, "There's the door to my office. 12 steps from that door is the outside entrance. If you don't want to follow directions, don't let the door hit you on the way out. You know you're only supposed to direct those 2 and the others I've mentioned to call my attorney. If you can't handle it, look for a different position." She started tearing up and said, "I'm sorry. I'm just so upset that you're mad at me for forgetting about the attorney." That addressed the immediate crisis, but it didn't solve all the underlying issues. As expected, Cynthia filed a countersuit and demanded 50% of all my assets. Kathleen laughed and advised me to place all of my non-business assets into an escrow account. She also mentioned that she had heard from Moore's company attorney, who was offering a settlement. When I heard the amount, I couldn't help but laugh. "Tell the attorney that I'll settle for 15% of the company, with Cynthia and the other person being terminated for cause, and for Cynthia to sign the papers as presented to her," I instructed. "If they come back with any offer that spares him, reject it immediately. But I will settle for Cynthia's signature on the papers." $10 million, and for him to be fired. And of course, they must cover all of your fees, so charge what you need. That's what eventually happened. Then, after my mother passed, things took a turn for the worse, leading us to the moment when I saw the police car. Jason looked devastated, guilty, and nearly in tears. He dropped his end of the safe, causing Cynthia to lose her grip as well. She ended up trapping her foot under the safe, and I heard the bones crunch from where I stood several feet away. She screamed, though it sounded more like anger than pain. Then, she yelled, "You have to ruin everything. Why couldn't you wait until tomorrow to come here?" I was stunned at first, but then the anger took hold, and I became completely calm. Through gritted teeth, I said, "Officer, I want these two arrested on every charge you can bring. I want a court official or an officer to go inside and inventory the cabin for any damages and make note of anything missing." You saw the cut lock on the gate. This woman, my ex-wife, has no claim on this property or its contents. I have the deed transfer papers in my car, and her name is nowhere on them. The officer proceeded to arrest Jason and Cynthia, handcuffing them both before calling for an ambulance. He then asked me to come with him while the crime scene technicians finished their work. We went to a local diner, where the officer mentioned that he had dealt with my grandfather in the past and found him to be honorable and trustworthy. He also shared that the sheriff's department had been keeping an eye on the gate because they knew the cabin was vacant. Once the crime scene team finished their investigation, the charges against Jason and Cynthia were escalated to include conspiracy to commit arson. It turned out that they had brought a stack of newspapers and a small candle, placed the newspapers in the main part of the cabin, and set the candle on top. If the candle had burned through, the cabin would have caught fire before anyone could have extinguished it. Everything that Jason and Cynthia had taken was recovered, the cabin damage was repaired, and the charges were officially filed. Jason pled guilty and was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in prison. Mr. Moore arranged for a psychiatrist to examine Cynthia, and she was committed to a private mental institution. She still had the pending charges awaiting her release, if and when that happens. While in the hospital, Cynthia was determined to be pregnant. The baby boy was born there and placed in the care of his grandparents. I was not the father, and when they insisted on a DNA test, it turned out that neither Jason nor the other man was the biological father either. Despite everything, I still cared for Cynthia, but I realized that life had to go on, and I didn't need the pain and complications anymore. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.